Public Service Commission, and we're now on the public record. This is case number 2018-00017, application of Martin County Water District for alternative rate adjustment and request for emergency rates. My name is Michael Schmidt. I'm chairman of the commission. Seated to my left is Commissioner Talina Matthews. Vice Chairman Robert Cicero is not here today, but he will be reviewing the proceedings and the record and will be participating in the decision. The purpose of the hearing today is to receive evidence on the request of Martin County Water District for emergency rates pursuant to KRS 278.190 subsection 2. This request was made by a letter which was received by the Commission along with the district's alternative rate filing, and the standard by which the decision will be made will be, according to the statute, whether Martin County Water District's credit or operations will be materially impaired or damaged by failure to permit this emergency rate increase. The testimony at the hearing today will be limited to that issue and nothing else. We realize that there is another case pending involving the Commission's investigation of the operation and management of the Water District, but the concerns and subject matter of that hearing will not be addressed today. The public should know, and the Council does know, that whatever decision is made in the emergency rate case is subject to being changed when the final rates are approved in the case. So that in the event there is a finding that an emergency rate is required, those rates could be adjusted downward depending on the evidence at the end of the case, and if that occurs, then a credit would be forthcoming for customers who paid an amount in excess, perhaps, of the final rate. At this time, I know that there was in the initial order setting this hearing, a requirement that the Martin County Water District provide notice of the hearing to the public. A deviation was granted in terms of time and the type of notice because of the short time period for the hearing. And Mr. Cumbo, counsel for the Water District, has sent a letter along with a copy of the notification that was given on Facebook, and that will be entered in the record to show that public notice as required by the order was given. Also, after the order was entered, Martin County concerned citizens filed a motion to intervene. It's noted that Martin County concerned citizens represents a number of citizens and customers of the Martin County Water District. Also, they've asked to intervene in this case, and they have intervened in the other case before the Commission. They seem to have a special interest in the case. The Attorney General has not intervened in this case on behalf of the ratepayers, and so although no written order has been signed at this time, the motion of Martin County concerned citizens to intervene in this case is hereby sustained. And the concerned citizens group and their attorney will be entitled to participate in this hearing. Before we go forward, however, with the hearing, I wanted to comment, because of the type of hearing that we're having today, I'm going to alter the order in which proof is presented and cross-examination is presented. Normally, the Water District would present its evidence, which we will permit and will go first because the Water District has the burden of proof in terms of providing evidence that would sustain its request. Normally, we would permit the concerned citizens to cross-examination and go second, but because of the way this is basically a hearing based on, or the transcript of the hearing is in a short order form, and we have to consider it and look at the evidence. Staff counsel will cross-examine first, and then the concerned citizens will cross-examine second. I don't know at this point whether concerned citizens intends to have any testimony, but you may certainly call witnesses if you choose. Ms. Cromer, Mr. Gardner, do you intend to present testimony today at all?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Now, at this time, would counsel for the parties identify themselves for the record, beginning with Mr. Cumbo on behalf of the Water District?
I'm Brian Cumbo, counsel for Martin County Water District.
Okay, staff?
Brittany Koenig and Andrew Bowker on behalf of the Commission.
Martin County Concerned Citizens?
Good morning, Your Honor. Jim Gardner with Sturgill, Turner, Barker, and Maloney in Lexington. Also is Mary Cromer with the Appalachian Law Center. We are, the concerned citizens are not paying any fees for either of our representation. We're doing it pro bono. Wanted to make that clear to the record. Ms. Cromer will be doing most of the questioning today, or this morning, Your Honor, and it's possible, because this is such a short notice, if the Commission would indulge us in allowing perhaps me to ask a question or two on particular witnesses as well as Ms. Cromer, just because of the short notice. It won't be much, but we would ask the Commission to indulge us.
What do you think about that, Mr. Cumbo? Do you have any objection to it?
No objection.
Staff, any objection?
No objection.
Normally, that wouldn't be the case, but in this case, there is no objection, and considering the fact that there has been extremely short notice, that will be permitted.
Yes, sir. And one final point would be, we won't make any opening statement, but we would like to have the ability at the end to just briefly summarize what our position is.
I think that would be appropriate under the circumstances and would be helpful to us. And Mr. Cumbo will be permitted to make a closing statement, too, if he desires.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if I could just introduce Ms. Nina McCoy, who is chair of the Martin County Concerned Citizens, who is here today.
At this time, the Commission will accept comments from members of the public who are present today. Is there anyone here who would like to step forward and make a comment to the Commission on the record? If so, please go to the microphone, state your name and residence address, and then provide your comment. If anyone has a written comment they would like to file, please let us know and we'll see that that's taken care of too. Ms. McCoy, please step forward.
Okay, so I'm Nina McCoy. I live in Inez, Kentucky. And I have a few points that I want to get across before we make this decision about the rate hike. You make this decision. First of all, the immediate situation, the reason that this is an emergency, the immediate situation, of course, is so many people have been without water for an extended period of time. And a lot of reporters have asked me, well, what is that like to be without water? Some people, I mean, it's off only at night, but other people, it has been off for a month. And so when they ask me, and I'm hoping that you would be interested in this too, I can't really tell them. But I can only imagine, as I'm sure that you can only imagine, not being able to take a shower, not being able to take a bath, not being able to flush your toilet, let alone, I mean, you might have a bottle of water, but we're talking about basic necessities, and it is flu season. The other thing is, you know, they've had to shut it off so many hours that the schools have not been able to open because they would shut it off at 3 in the afternoon and turn it back on again, and they would not be able to clean the buildings for the children to come the next day. So just some examples of things I've heard from those people who have had to do this. An example of a man who said he used bottled water to take a shower when he could. Some people said they had hooked to their wells. Other people told us their wells were damaged by the mines years ago, and they never will be able to hook to their mines again, their wells again. Then, when they have complained, at different times, they have gotten talked down to or ignored. I know that the water plant is struggling, and I know that the workers are working really hard, but at the same time, there needs to be, when they are making their complaints, there needs to be patience with what they're going through. And I've had 2 different people tell me that when they called the PSC to do the complaining, that they have heard it, the conversation started with, you people in Martin County, and something about running water when it was freezing. I don't know. But just saying that it's been hard on these people. Okay, the next thing is, I want to thank the new board. I'm excited about new people coming on, and I think they're working very hard. And I want to thank all the employees who have been in the freezing cold out there doing this job. However, if you're going to ask for more money, one of the main long-term objectives, and it's going to take a long time, is to build trust. And there's a lot of distrust. Local politicians, we've been told, oh, well, it's your fault. You vote these people in. Let me tell you something. It's not just our politicians. Our politicians have been enabled. They've been enabled. There's been 3 PSC investigations, and yet it continues. So they've been enabled to continue with a mess. This is not our decision to let's make a mess and then let's just maybe not have to pay a rate hike. This has been going on for a long time. I want to thank the PSC because you all have finally taken us seriously. The Division of Water, when they came to the meeting that you all asked to be held in Inez, honestly, they just told us, oh, your water's fine, the regulations are a little too hard. That's the sense I got from them. So I really want to thank the PSC for not enabling this to continue. However, money has flowed through this county. The hardworking people in Martin County who are paying their bills have been asking for about 18 years what happened to the $3 million. And it's stuff of legend. Nobody has any idea about the $3 million. And at the last hearing I was at, the lawyer from the PSC said, oh yeah, I was on the investigation for the $3 million. What the heck? Tell us about the $3 million. That's what everybody mentions when you say there's going to be a rate hike. What about the $3 million? We don't know. So we would people need to know. You cannot keep things in secret. When we started to come to these meetings, we wanted to come to the new board meetings. We're excited about the new board. And we hear that there's a meeting and that that meeting is going to be, the first meeting is going to be January 4th. We hear from our lawyer who lives in Whitesburg that there's going to be a testimony by Greg Heitzman, who our water plant actually had to hire. So we should have been able to hear that. We were not told that the meeting was going to occur. And when we were told, it was said that it was going to be in executive session. Now, honestly, I'm not a lawyer. I just would have been, well, guess I can't hear that, until our lawyer said, no, that's not legal. You cannot hold that in executive session. The public has to hear what Mr. Heitzman says. So we were able to hear it at 8:30 in the morning, the next day after we'd heard about it. And then January 9th was the first actual meeting of, I guess, regular meeting of the new board, and one of the new board members sent word by the lawyer, Mr. Cumbo, that he wasn't aware of the meeting until 24 hours in advance. That's the kind of thing that you just can't continue. I'm not blaming the new board members, but there's a real breakdown in communication, and it's going to take totally years to get any trust from a community that's been condemned for so long to this. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is with future problems. And it's going to freeze again, and there are going to be problems again. But there has to be a notification system. We went to a meeting last night on some of the worst affected area, and there were about 50 people there. Out of those, only 3 of them had what's called code red notifications, which is one of the things that is supposed to notify us. I don't know where the breakdown is. That's a county problem. Then another thing, I'm so proud of the new board. They're putting it on Facebook. But according to our recent, estimation, about half the county doesn't have internet. And of those, a lot of the older people don't have Facebook. So that's not going to get it through. For phone messages, I know that a lot of people have cell phones. I know it's hard to keep up with that. But what about a television station? Contact the television station. Tell them if there's a boil water advisory. Contact every television station and tell them. Also, for the newspaper, I know it only comes out once a week, but it came out Wednesday, and it did not get the public notice of this meeting. So that is something that, again, you've got to get it out there. It has to be in the newspapers when it's available. That's our newspaper, the legal newspaper. Also, I know you don't have money, but if you, anyway, you need to have a staff person there from 4 until 12 to answer calls. Or some way, you have to be able to take calls from people who are saying, you know what, I'm seeing a big leak right outside, or my water's not on, or whatever it is. I know that it's hard to pay people to do that, but, and not only that, but they will contact us, and then we'll just look it up, we'll Google it, why is my water blue? And then we'll try to figure out what's going on. Well, if you had somebody on staff that could Google it, and then maybe try to give answers, and hopefully they would even know beforehand. Another thing, if you do the rate hike, the current average bill in Martin County is $42.34, according to the record that we have, and it compares all the different rates. And if you raise that by what has been possibly questioned for, it would be $63.30 a month for one of the poorest counties in the nation, let alone the state. And we would be the second highest rate in the state. The first highest would be Jessamine, South Elkhorn, and we would be number 2. So just consider all those things when you're thinking about putting a rate hike on people who are paying their bills. There may be a problem with some that don't, but these are the people who pay their bills and then can't get water when they need it. Thank you. Thanks to the new board.
Anyone else care to make a public comment? If not, Mr. Cumbo, would you please call your first witness?
The Commissioner of the District will call Linda Sumter.
Thank you. Would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Do.
Okay, you may be seated. Mr. Cumbo, you may ask.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Linda, you have been before the commission before, but this is a separate case. So would you introduce yourself for the record?
I am Linda Sumter. I'm the CPA to the Water District.
And how long have you been a CPA?
25 years.
Are you affiliated in any fashion with the Martin County Water District?
We provide contracted services to the district.
And how long have you been doing that?
Since 2004, 4 in that general.
Are you familiar with the finances and cash flow position of the district?
We are.
Describe those in general terms for the commission.
In general terms, I would consider them critical.
Would you please speak up a little into the microphone? It's hard to hear you.
In general terms, I would consider them critical.
For what period of time has the finances been critical?
They started to decline in 2014-15 and continue to do so through 16 and 17.
So, this is not a problem that occurred overnight.
No, it is not.
Are you familiar with the steps the district is undertaking to address that problem?
Yes, they've taken numerous steps to.
Could you describe those to the commission?
They have taken measures to cut all expenses that are absolutely necessary. They've taken measures to watch overtime. They've taken measures to increase revenue, if at all possible, and worked on several issues in revenue to promote revenue as much as possible.
Do you have a number for the current amount of the accounts payable owed by the district?
As of Wednesday, it was $816,876.94.
And do you have at hand how much of that is over 90 days?
$613,073.70.
6,000?
$613,073.70.
Commissioner, I have an exhibit, which is the payables as of December 31st, 2017. If I could circulate those.
Do you have copies for everyone? Yes, then. Thank you.
Those documents that I've handed you, Ms. Sumter, do you recognize those?
I do.
What are those?
These are the aged accounts payable for the Martin County Water District.
Were those generated by your office at my request?
They were.
Is that a true and accurate copy of the accounts payable as of December 31st, 2017?
That is a true and correct record for all invoices that we have received and been able to process.
We'd offer that as the district's first numbered exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection.
Let it be filed and admitted into evidence as Martin County Water District Exhibit 1.
Just to reiterate these numbers again, the past due accounts payable are $808,209.19.
As of Wednesday, they were $816,876.94.
Wednesday would be the 23rd, January 23rd, 2018.
Correct.
Do you have a number that is aged over 90 days as of January 23rd, 2018?
$614,073.70.
Of this list of vendors that we made as an exhibit, are you aware of any vendors that have placed the district on a cash-on-delivery basis?
Several of the vendors have, and they are vendors that are crucial to the operations of the district. The CODs are All Pumps, Evans Hardware, Service Pump, Souls Electric, and of secondary importance would be Centos. Those in addition to COD that has contacted the district concerning collection efforts that they are on some type of payment agreement with are Consolidated Pipe, C.I. Thornburg, and Xylem.
What was that last one?
Xylem. They are Xylem. XYLEM. They are a pumping service and sales.
Of those that have put us on a cash-only basis or a payment plan, it's notable that it looks like those are suppliers of chemicals and pumps and pump repair products
And fittings.
and fittings. Fittings being repair couplings, things of that nature.
Correct.
Absent some relief from the commission, in your opinion, as their accountant, will the district be able to continue as a viable entity into the future?
There is a going concern issue.
Are you familiar with the recent events that happened during the cold spell we had during January?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with the amount of overtime that personnel, I butchered that question terribly. Are you familiar with the amount of overtime that was required to deal with the issues that arose during that cold snap?
Yes, those were submitted to our office this past week for payroll preparation. There was 622 hours of overtime.
And as we sit here today, does the district have the ability to make its payroll?
As of Tuesday, we were in serious doubt. As of yesterday, we were able to make that payroll.
How much money do we have left after making payroll?
The cash flow will be basically depleted because in addition to payroll, there were AEP electrical accounts, power providers that were passing cutoff dates. So we were also trying to calculate cash flow for the district that would be able to meet those needs as well.
Let's shift gears a little bit, Ms. Sumser, and look at, I think it's attachment 2 in the district's application for rate adjustment. And I have copies of that if you guys need it. You have before you what is labeled a schedule of adjusted operations. Are you familiar with that document?
Yes, I am.
And that, as I understand it, was attached with our rate application that was filed with the commission.
Correct.
When was that filed? January 5th?
Any objection? Let it be filed and received into evidence as Water District Exhibit 2.
Now, in this column labeled test year, is that, as I understand it, that's for the year 2016. Is that
Correct.
I'm sorry, excuse me, I couldn't hear 2000 what?
16.
Okay, thank you.
And as I understand it, that's because we couldn't put together the year 2017 in time to attach.
That's correct. We're closing year 2017.
A couple of things about that schedule, Ms. Sumser, that I think are important for the commission to understand. If we look at salaries and wages and employee pensions and benefits, that number, if my math is correct, is about 30% of our operating expense. Is that correct?
Correct. They are labor-driven.
Is that number, in your experience, is that number comparable to other utilities in our area?
In the eastern Kentucky area.
As I understand it, you also do some accounting work for the county government.
I do.
Are the wages and salaries of the employees of the district comparable to those of the county government employees?
They are comparable.
Do you know what the hourly wage is for the employees of the district?
Distribution and distribution maintenance is $11.38 an hour. Plant and plant personnel are range between 15 and 19.
Plant personnel are those folks who are certified treatment plant operators?
Correct.
It looks like our next largest expense is the power, the electricity.
Correct.
If my math is correct, that's about 13% of our total operating expenses.
Yes.
Is that correct? Based on your experience, is that number comparable to other utilities in the eastern Kentucky area?
It is comparable.
In all fairness to the district, that's that rate that we're paying for power is that totally out of our control.
Yes, it is.
Now, we have testified in the other case, and I believe it's important for the commission to understand in this case that the commission has introduced some best management practices relative to minimizing the electricity or power expense. Is that correct?
Correct.
What things have they done in your knowledge?
The district has taken steps to try to do pumping schedules at night on a different rate. Soft starts, and that is not my area of expertise, but soft starts on pumps, those types of issues to reduce electrical power costs.
And I think we have some other folks who can elaborate on that in all fairness to you.
Yes.
Then our next biggest expense looks like materials and supplies,
Correct.
which is running about 5% of our total operating expense.
And keep in mind that those supplies are extremely limited due to the order of their financial situation.
And I think that's a point that we can jump into right now. The district really is in no bargaining position with these suppliers. Is
Correct.
that correct? And that is because we're delinquent with all of them.
Exactly.
We're sort of at their mercy for these things, and there's a limited number of folks who make these available.
Yes.
Has the district done other things within the past several years to try to maximize or minimize the expenses? I know, for instance, we refinanced some loans here within the past several years.
That's correct. The district had 4 RD bond issues, which they rolled into one bond issue through Kentucky Rural Water. And over the life of the bonds, initially when we started the refi, was $185,000 in savings.
Currently, are all our bond payments current?
They are.
In your opinion, based on the situation that we find ourselves in now, will we be able to maintain that currency without an influx of capital?
It will not be sustainable.
In your opinion, as the district accountant, will the district's ability to continue to operate be materially impaired or damaged if we don't get some emergency rate relief?
That is correct.
No further questions of this witness.
Staff?
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Sumter.
Good morning.
I just have a few questions just to clarify your statement. I understand that your opinion is Martin County Water District's credit and operations will be materially impaired or damaged if they don't get an influx of cash. That's what you just testified to? Okay. Did you have any part in putting together this application?
I provided some of the documents for Allen the Lines.
Okay. And if I understand your testimony correctly, this was put together before the emergency in January. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you, were you involved in selecting the amount that they requested, the 49.6?
No, all we did was supply documents for their preparation.
Okay. And this might be for another representative, but do you know the exact amount that's being requested in this emergency rate increase? The amount?
49.9, yes.
Okay. And just to clarify, that was in the application, but it was not specified and how much of a rate increase was requested for the emergency rate increase. But that's your testimony,
Correct.
that that's what's requested. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. That's all.
Counsel?
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Sumter. My name is Mary Cromer. I represent the Martin County Concerned Citizens, and I'm involved in the investigation, so I've seen you testify before. I wanted to ask a little bit about your financial arrangement with the district. Have you been paid?
No, ma'am, not since 2014.
And is the money that's due, is it due to you personally, or is it due to your firm?
To the firm.
To the firm. How long will you be able to continue to work without payment?
Our intent is to assist the district as long as is necessary due to community, due to our ability to work with the community.
In your opinion, would the district be able to function without your services?
The district does not have personnel on staff that would be able to perform the functions that we perform for them.
So are those duties, especially the duties, and I'm going to refer to the record in the previous case, I believe that you have testified that you work with the district on a daily basis.
Correct.
Is that correct? So in your opinion, are those duties that would be better served in-house?
Not at this point in their operations.
Ideally, would it be better to have your functions performed in-house?
It depends what you're determining as our functions. There are several levels of services involved here.
Okay, well, let me talk a little bit about that. So you said, I think on June 1st, you said that you maintain the receipts and disbursements for the district?
The district makes their own, they do their billing and do their collections in-house.
Okay.
We only record them to the general ledgers.
And what about receipts? Do you see, like for purchases, do you see those receipts?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Do you get them on a daily basis, or how often do you get them?
We get them, some, as in AEP, by email, and the rest of them are brought to us and presented to us by the business manager.
Okay, and is that Joe Hammond?
Correct.
Okay. And how often does he bring those receipts?
He's in our office usually daily.
Okay, so he comes in every day and brings you receipts for the expenses,
Correct.
and then you record those.
We
in some
record,
way.
process them.
Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the expenditures, especially when, and I want to sort of focus in on some of the accounts payable information that you presented today.
Okay.
it looks like, and I'm looking at Zip Zone in particular. So I'm just trying to understand this process of getting receipts. Let's look at a date. I don't know. There are a number of purchases for Zip Zone, but I want to focus in on like a small purchase. Let's look at a receipt for like something less than $10. What would the receipt show you? So Mr. Hammond brings you a receipt that's from Zip Zone. Let's say it's for $5.25. What do you
Right.
see on that receipt?
Zip Zone normally writes them out a handwritten invoice along with their Z-ticket, and on it is listed what the purchase was.
Okay, so you do see what was purchased. And do you see who purchased it?
Normally, the Water District personnel has to sign off on that receipt.
What Water District personnel?
The person authorized to make the purchase.
Okay, well, then, so who is authorized to make purchases at Zip Zone?
The Zip Zone is fuel, so the general managers and the distribution managers, or distribution and managers and personnel.
And personnel would be any personnel?
Field workers,
Field workers, okay. And Zip Zone sells more than just gasoline, right?
that's correct.
And is it an open account? Is it that they provide a receipt and, I mean, do employees have credit cards that they come in and purchase at Zip Zone, or do they go into Zip Zone knows that they're an employee of the Water District, and they add it to an account? How does it work?
The latter.
The latter, okay. So what controls are in place to ensure that all of those purchases are legitimate expenses?
They are those purchases are overseen by the business manager.
Okay, so Mr. Hammond looks at each of those receipts and determines whether or not that it's gas or, to make sure that it's not lunch or gum or whatever.
Correct.
Okay. So you don't do that. You don't actually look over those receipts to make sure that they're legitimate business expenses.
We view the receipts.
Okay, but it's not your job to look over and make sure that employee purchasing is not being abused, I guess.
If that's correct, it is the business manager's responsibility to do that. If we saw something, then we would point it out to the business manager.
And you're speaking again of Mr. Hammond,
Correct.
and he's not here today.
Correct.
Are there any other controls on employees' purchasing of consumables?
As in consumables, do you
As
mean
in-
pipe fittings or?
No, I mean things like gas or smaller items.
All employees are supposed to provide or request a PO or permission in an emergency situation to make those purchases.
Let me ask some about employee benefits.
Correct.
I believe that you said that the salary and benefits for the employees was about 30% of the district's expenses. It looks like it's more like 40. Would you disagree with that?
Well, it
statement?
depends on which month you're looking at it, because they are on a biweekly payroll system, which means that there's 26 pay periods in a year. On given months, you will see a statement that includes 3 pay periods.
Well, I'm referring to what was presented as Exhibit 2, which includes the test year that we're basing all of this on. So which has the operating expenses is $2,049,000, and then you've got the salaries and wages at $553,390, and employee pensions and benefits at $296,755. So that's what I was doing the calculation.
I probably need to interject here, Commissioner, and offer an objection. The council is referencing a number that is not actually correct. The total operating expenses as shown on the schedule of adjusted operations is $2,868,168. Council is looking at a total operation and maintenance expenses, which is a much lower number.
Your Honor, we thought he had said operating and maintenance, so that's fine. So 30% or 40%. I think you testified also that you believed that percentage, I mean, it's a big chunk regardless, 30 or 40, it's the most substantial chunk of the budget. You testified that was in line with other water districts. Is that correct?
Correct.
What's your experience with other water districts? Do you represent other water districts?
No, I do not.
Okay. Have you done an analysis of other water districts?
Just a sample testing.
Sample testing. So your statement that it was in line with other water districts was based on a sample. How many water districts did you look at?
I looked at 4 to 6 in the eastern Kentucky area.
Regarding the accounts receivable, do you know how many customers of the water districts are more than 30 days past due?
The accounts receivable,
Accounts receivable, yes.
I do not have that information with me, but I could provide that at your request.
Do you work with the accounts receivable?
The accounts receivable, the billing and the collections are done in the water district office. We only record the end results to the general ledger, but we do have access to them and review them.
And when was the last time you've reviewed those?
We review them no less than monthly.
Okay. Do you have a sense of whether there are a number of accounts receivable more than 30 days old?
There would be a substantial amount.
Do you know the district's policy on collections?
I am somewhat familiar, but I would not be an authoritative.
Okay. And do you know who would be the best person to ask these questions regarding collections?
The business manager, or there is a head clerk.
Okay. So Mr. Hammond would likely have been the person who should
Correct.
be. Okay. I want to ask some questions about procurement. And they've provided in the investigation, we got a copy through our data request. A copy was put in the record of procurement policy, and I just wanted to ask, has the district made any recent large purchases, more than $20,000?
As to what's the time period you're referring to as recent?
In the last 6 months. So.
I would have to review that.
So I have some more questions about accounts payable, and I think you've talked about a few of the vendors who, like Evans Hardware, for instance. Let's just use that as an example. And I'm trying to get at whether, at what expenses are capitalized and which are recorded as expenses. So does the water district have a policy for when to capitalize expenses rather than record them just as expenses?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And what is that policy generally?
That policy is if it is a normal operating expense or repair, that is a current expense. If there is a capital project, or a project that is going to basically have a life of more than 12 months, then it is capitalized.
And so let's say, for instance, if there is a line break that necessitates replacing an area of pipe, how is that expensed? How is that recorded?
It depends on if it's just a repair of a break, or if they go in and extend an entire service line, then they are to define the difference in that repair.
And who makes the determination as to whether it is an expense or a capital, how to report it as an expense or capital?
Well, your distribution manager would be the one to explain the nature, and then, of course, it goes through the business office.
And the reason I'm asking, or the reason that I think this is significant, is it seems that the way things have been going with the district, there are so many breaks and so many repairs that are needed that the line between what is just doing a repair and when they have the pipe to do it, what is, replacing a line, that's pretty blurry. And so you say that Mr. Mills would likely be the one who could answer these questions about how those are handled. Okay, thank you. Let's see. I believe that you were talking about the steps that the Water District had taken to sort of address their financial crisis, and I wasn't clear on the time period you were talking about it, but you talked about cutting expenses. Over what time period are you talking?
We're talking about from 2015 through 2017 for the most part.
And what exactly have they been doing?
Only ordering parts, fittings, etc., as needed. Of course, they depleted inventories. Reducing current operating expenses, such as they have worked on their methods of reducing power consumption, reducing overtime, and monitoring and minimalizing the order of parts, fittings, that type of thing.
I want to ask, in this line of questioning on cutting expenses, I see that what you've all provided is Exhibit 1, the accounts payable, as of December 31st, 2017. There's $104,000, it looks like, that's 0 to 30 days.
Correct.
That seems like, is $140,000 in 0 to 30 days, is that a lot to you? Does that seem like a high number, or is that average?
104 for a given month. It depends on the events, the weather, and it does fluctuate.
Okay. Was December an average month, or as far as the weather, the events? I mean, this was before the crisis happened.
It would be average.
Okay, so that's average.
And just another point of note here, Commissioner, we're looking at numbers for 2016.
And, Your Honor, are we going to focus on current operational expenses? My understanding was we weren't going to go past. This is part of the investigation that will be borne out we have a field review scheduled and on this application, but that's not part
I'm sorry, I
parcel to this here.
misspoke. That figure she just quoted was 2017. I misspoke.
Yeah, it was last month. And as to the relevancy of this line of questioning, I think, what is fundamentally at issue is not just whether or not they can survive without an influx of cash, but whether or not the management of the district is part of the issue that has gotten us to this point, and whether an influx of cash is really going to help the situation, or if it's...
You may proceed.
Thank you. You had testified regarding, I believe, the wages for the distribution and plant employees.
Right.
Do you know Mr. Hammond's salary?
For the Water District, I I would have to look that up, but it's in the approximation of $26,000 a year.
Mr. Hammond's salary is $26,000 per year?
Correct. I would have to confirm that, but from memory, it's $26,000 a year.
And Mr. Mills' salary?
The water district is 40, I would have to confirm that, but it's in the neighborhood of 48,000.
And so you're, when you answer that question, you've qualified it as for the water district. Would you explain why?
Because that is their salary from the water district.
Okay, but is there another salary that is at issue? I mean, does Mr. Hammond also get a salary from the sewer district, for instance?
He does get a small salary from the sewer district.
Okay. And is that separate from the salary from the water district?
Totally separate.
Does Mr. Hammond receive any other salary from the water board?
He does receive a small salary from the sanitation district.
And is that the same as the sewer that you were talking about?
It is.
Okay. I wanted to ask some questions about collections. You mentioned that several of the vendors had threatened collection actions, and some were I think your words were something like putting the district on a payment plan.
Correct.
Has the district attempted to negotiate a payment plan with any of the vendors proactively?
They have.
They have. Okay. And which vendors?
They have a payment agreement with C.I. Thornburg, Xylem, and they're negotiating one with Souls Electric currently.
Okay. What about the AEP? Have they negotiated a payment agreement with AEP?
They have on some of the larger accounts.
If you'll allow me just one moment.
And, Your Honor, I have just a couple. Ms. Sumter, in looking at the numbers in the test year, it shows that wages, salaries, and pensions total roughly $850,000. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and for operation and maintenance expenses, not including depreciation, that's $2 million. So that is roughly 40%. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. Are you familiar with, on the PSC website for the last week has been a statement by Vice Chairman Robert Cicero about employee benefits? Are you aware of that?
No.
All right, let me just read you one sentence that he says on page 2 of what he said. For example, in the title of this document printed off the website is Comments at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce Energy Conference, Fair, Just, and Reasonable Accountability. And one sentence on page 2 says, for example, investor-owned utilities salary and benefit costs represent approximately 1 in every 7 O&M dollars spent. Would you agree that that's roughly 14%?
Yes,
Not 40%, 1 in 14%. So it should come as no surprise that the commission is examining them with the same fair, just, and reasonable standard as any other cost. You're not familiar with that?
no, I'm not.
Now, you said that you started working for the district in approximately 2004?
I would have to confirm the date, but it was in that general area.
Okay. And were you working with the water district when they filed for a rate increase in 2010?
Yes,
Were you aware that at the time the staff report indicates that the water loss was between 49 and 62%? Does that surprise you that back then it was at about roughly the same amount that it is now, right?
right.
Okay, nothing's changed as far as the water loss. It just varies a little bit by year, but it's still in that range, right?
To my knowledge,
Okay. And did you work with the water district during that case?
yes, I did.
All right. And do you recall that the staff, and this was case number 2010-00300, that staff recommended, because of the extreme water loss and the need for capital expenditures, that you all do a surcharge and put sufficient controls on how the money is spent? Are you familiar with that recommendation by the staff?
Yes,
Did you all do that?
not to this point.
Okay, all right. So you were put on notice of that way back in 2011 when the staff report came out. And nothing has happened in the last 7 years, but now there's an emergency, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's all.
Commissioner Cicero? Commissioner Matthews?
That's a whole different
That's a psychological issue there somewhere.
I don't have any questions. Wouldn't be able to hear me if I did.
Ms. Sumter, you indicated that the water district owed you money or your firm money. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How much is your firm owed in fees for accounting services?
At the end of December, it was $136,500.
$136,500
Correct.
out of the total of $816,876.94 that represent present accounts receivable, correct?
Well, this was at the end of December. The number I just
So
gave
they
you.
would owe you to be owed more now,
Yes.
correct? Okay. I'm not going to ask you to look up anything that might be owed to Mr. Cumbo, but are there outstanding fees or bills for legal services?
There is.
You indicated that I think, more or less, that the district could not continue its operation and provide water services unless it obtained an emergency rate increase at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Over what period of time? In other words, assuming no emergency increase was granted, how long could the district, in your opinion, if you have one, continue to operate before essentially it would no longer be able to obtain parts, supplies, and make payroll?
That's a difficult time frame, but my guess would be 4 to 6 months.
In order, any rate increase that was granted at this time, of course, the district wouldn't be able to see any benefit from that rate increase for at least until the next billing cycle. Would that be fair to say?
Correct.
Does the district have money in the bank now?
The district has little money in the bank as of today because their crisis of this week was to cover the excessive payroll caused by the frigid temperatures and meet the absolute requirements for AEP this week.
Well, is there money in the bank? Is that what you're saying?
To cover those items, yes.
Cover that. Well, how much is in the account? Do you know?
I would prefer to review that and send it to you, because they do have a grant account and some restricted accounts, such as the customer deposits, which we don't consider available for operating expenses.
How much does the district have in outstanding loans at this time?
They have, along with the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority, they have a bond issue through Kentucky Rural Water, and they have a lease agreement through KACO.
Do you know how much those total?
KIA is around $550,000. Kentucky Rural Water would be about 1.890, and then KACO is about 116,000.
Has the water district in the last 2 to 3 months attempted to obtain financing from any bank or lending institution?
My understanding is the general manager had approached several local banks in the past couple of weeks.
And what were the results of those efforts, if any?
At this point, nothing, no real progress.
Are you saying that the institutions who were approached by the general manager were not receptive to loaning the water district any money?
Correct, at this point.
How much does the Martin County Water District have outstanding in accounts receivable?
As of the 23rd, it was 800. I'm sorry, you said accounts receivable.
Accounts receivable.
I can't tell you exactly, but the total accounts receivable is in the ballpark of $650,000.
And in the accounts receivable of $650,000, do you know about how much of that money is over 60 days?
Probably 90% or better.
90% or better? For the record here, what efforts has the Martin County Water District made to collect any of this $650,000 in accounts receivable?
I know they have discussed with legal counsel looking at a collection agent.
Yeah, I understand that. I watched on the monitor the hearing months ago, the first one. I understand about discussing. That discussion's been going on for years, hasn't it?
Correct.
And nothing's been done, has it, as far as you know?
Not at this point.
No lawsuits have been filed, correct?
Correct.
And no efforts have been made to sell the accounts receivable to some other company or some institution so that you could get money and they could have made collection efforts. Isn't that true?
The board has discussed that recently.
I know they've discussed it. I'm asking you what's been done.
There's nothing, nothing actually at this point. The receivables are the majority of them are uncollectible. So it makes it very difficult to go out and sell those receivables.
Well, how do you know you don't know if they're uncollectible if nobody's tried to collect it, though? Isn't that really true?
That's true.
Now, in your professional opinion as an accountant, what good does it possibly do to give the district $800,000, a 49.6% increase, $900,000 in extra money if you're not going to collect the bills? I mean, pretty soon when you run out of money, then where are you supposed to, when you spend that money, how are you ever going to continue on in operations if you don't collect the debts?
This board has been considering reviewing the tariff and what additional collection efforts they can make.
I mean, without collecting bills, without taking some effort for the customers to pay, the district can't operate successfully. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
I noted somewhere that there was an effort the district was making with the city of Prestonsburg to lease, I guess, a water tank near the federal prison for $15,000 a month to Prestonsburg or Prestonsburg. Has that
Yes.
come to fruition?
The agreement was reviewed, but it is not signed by the Prestonsburg utilities at this point.
Do you know if they intend to sign it?
That would be out of my area of expertise.
So that's not in place at this time, correct?
Not currently.
No further questions. Mr. Cumbo?
Just a couple of follow-up, Commissioner. Let's talk about a day in the life of keeping the district afloat. When it comes time to pay bills for the district, explain to the commission the process you folks go through to allocate those scarce resources.
We have a sequencing of available cash flow disbursements. The hierarchy is payroll and related payroll taxes, insurances, bond and lease requirements, utilities, chemicals and labs, and then on the secondary level, required emergency vendor purchases and CODs, required depleted biddings and materials, emergency equipment repairs, vendor arrangements for preventing collection procedures, and vendor payments as cash flow permits.
And what do you do when there's not enough money to go around?
We follow that hierarchy and try to accommodate as many of these needed items as possible.
No further questions. No further
Anything
questions.
further? Staff?
One follow-up.
Mr. Gardner?
Thank you, Your Honor. You were talking about on the expenses such as the $75,000 that's been incurred at Zip Zone, that there are controls on that, and you described that. Are there written policies as to who can incur those costs, and under what circumstances?
You would have to talk with the business manager. I am aware of an administrative policies and procedures manual.
Excuse me, there is and it tells who is authorized to incur those costs?
They have a policy.
Is it in writing?
You would have to talk with the business manager
He's
about
not here,
that.
right?
Correct.
That's all I have. Thank you, Your Honor.
One question.
May this witness be excused? Yes. Thank you. You may stand down. Mr. Cumbo, please call your next witness.
Call John Henry. Man.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. You may be seated. Mr. Cumbo, you may ask.
John, would you introduce yourself to the commissioners?
My name's John Horn. I'm the chairman of the Martin County Water Board or Commission.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the president of Logan Corporation.
What is your educational background?
I've got a bachelor's of science from Morehead State University in industrial engineering and technology.
And how long have you been president of Logan Corporation?
I've been president about a year and held various other titles.
And how long have you been chairman of the water board?
About 2 weeks.
How's that working out for you?
It's been fun.
John, where do you live?
I live in Inez.
And obviously, as a, I assume you're a customer of the water district.
Yes, sir.
And I assume that you're intimately familiar with the problems of the water district.
I am very familiar.
Tell the commission very briefly about the turnover in the board that we've had recently.
There were 5 commissioners. One resigned in November, I think. October, November, Mr. Clark. And then the remaining commissioners, besides myself, all resigned on the same day. I don't remember that date off the top of my head.
Well, for all intent and purposes, we've got a new board that's been in place about 2 to 3 weeks.
We do. I've been on the board about 9 months. Otherwise, every other member's new.
How is this new board prioritizing the issues confronting the district?
Well, obviously, our number one priority the last couple of weeks has been getting water to our customers. We've talked about it as a board in public meeting. Our priorities are to supply reliable, safe drinking water to our customers. Obviously, looking into the future is important. That's something that we feel like hasn't been done in the past. I think we had a good board before and they made progress, but there are things that need to be done so our children can live in Martin County and have safe, reliable drinking water.
Are you familiar with the current financial situation of the district?
I am.
You heard Ms. Sumser's testimony. Is there anything about her testimony about which you disagree?
No.
Are you part of the...
Let me rephrase it. I disagree with 4 to 6 months of viability. I think it's more like 60 to 90 days based on my business experience.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to get to that. Based on your background in business and running a corporation such as the Logan Corporation, that gives you some extra knowledge to deal with the issues facing the district. And if I understand your testimony, you believe we're viable for another 60 to 90 days?
We're going to miss a payroll in the next 90 days. And when we do, all of our employees will quit.
When we got notice of this hearing, John, I started thinking, sitting in my office, wondering what's the biggest priority for the water district in terms of keeping an ongoing concern. And the first thing I thought of was, well, we got to have power, or we can't get water to treat. But then we got to have chemicals to treat the water with. And then I thought, well, we got to have some certified operators to run the treatment plant. Then I thought, well, we got to have some equipment to repair the leaks that come up. And it seems to me that everything we have as far as expenditures is 1A, 1B, 1C, and we don't have any lower tiers that we can allocate or put off dealing with. Is that consistent with your understanding?
It is. We haven't bought any fittings. Everybody's been using the word fittings. We haven't. Actually, we did beg C.I. Thornburg for some during the crisis. Otherwise, we've dug up old lines that aren't being used and had our employees take used parts and make repairs during this crisis with used parts. We're putting a patch on a bomb.
Tell the commission a little bit about this recent crisis. How did that come about? What happened?
The raw water intake pump in the river froze, damaged the pump. We have 2 pumps. The backup pump was at Souls Electric, I believe, for repair. The bill on it's $30,000. We've been on COD. We hadn't been able to pick that pump up. So we went down on the raw water intake in the river. we couldn't supply the reservoir with water. We were in danger of running out of water in the reservoir and therefore not being able to produce enough clear water to supply our customers. And then as freezes go, a lot of people are worried that their pipes are going to freeze off for obvious reasons. They let their water drip, our usage goes up. And then as the thaw hits, you know what happens when there's a thaw, things start bursting. Frozen water doesn't leak, thawed water does. So the ground froze 17 inches deep, is the deepest freeze in my lifetime that I know of. We had all kinds of leaks. When we started having these main lines burst, and service lines, and meters, and just anything that could bust or leak did, we ran out of water. We had to shut the water off at night for the whole county several nights, so we could try to get some water cleaned and get it in our tanks to service our customers. And then in areas with bad leaks, we had to shut those areas off at night too, so we could fix leaks and we could get water back in those tanks.
Sort of, I characterize it as a perfect storm of events.
It was.
Let's get back to the finances then. Those sorts of things obviously seriously impact the district's ability to finance its ongoing operations.
Sure. 622 hours of overtime during that time period is not, it's unbelievable is what it is. Our guys worked from 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning until midnight just about every day.
And not only that, we had to, as I recall, we had to rent a pump to put in at the river.
We rented a pump to put in at the river. We rented a pump to put in at the reservoir. Because the reservoir level was so low, we had to pump water from the reservoir into our intake tube to get water during that time.
And just so the commission has a full understanding, what we do is we pump from the river into a reservoir, and then the reservoir gravity feeds into the water plant.
Yeah, the reservoir is probably, I mean, I didn't do the engineering design work on it obviously, but it's probably big enough to service 300 customers without another source of water supplying it.
And with this crisis on top of where the district was at beforehand, are we at a financial crisis?
We are.
And will the operations of the district be materially impaired or damaged if the district does not receive an emergency rate increase?
I believe they will, yes.
No further questions.
Staff?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Moore.
Morning.
So I'm going to try not to repeat, but I might have to repeat a few questions. You signed the application in this case, the ARF application for rate increase?
Yes.
Okay. And did you read the application and all of its exhibits when you signed it?
Yes.
Okay. Did you decide to file the ARF application along with the board? Were you the one, I mean, who advised you as far as?
We had outside consultant advise us too.
Okay, and who prepared the application?
Greg Heitzman, Kentucky Blue Water.
Okay. Did he come up with the amount of 49.6%?
Kentucky Rural Water did a rate study for that number.
So that amount was arrived at before the crisis in
Yes.
January. And if I'm correct, your business manager, Joe Hammond, wrote the cover letter that requested the emergency funds, or the emergency rate increase.
I don't believe Mr. Hammond wrote the letter.
Yeah, but he signed it.
He may have signed it.
We'll go ahead and, it's part of your application, but we'll pass it out for you to refer to if you need to.
Yes, you may.
So did you write this letter, or did you?
No, our consultant wrote the letter. The board reviewed it, and then we had a vote to have Mr. Hammond sign it.
Okay. And are you requesting 49.6% rate increase for the emergency rate increase?
Yes.
I'd also like to refer you to, you made a statement to your customers on Facebook during the crisis. And it's not part of the record. So we'd like to go ahead and make that an exhibit, staff's exhibit 1. You can go ahead.
As the witness, you're going to show it to the witness.
Okay. So in other words, you were already in, you said already in financial crisis when the board approved to file this application.
Yes.
And then you've, in your filing in the cover letters, when you asked for them to be implemented in an emergency status and asked for
Yes.
in the interim while we're deciding the ARF case. Okay. And you've said you've been a member of the Water District Board for 9 months.
I think so. I don't remember exactly when I was sworn in, but I believe it was April.
Okay. How long have you been a customer of Martin County Water District?
15 years.
Okay.
Well, my whole life, but I've actually paid a bill 15 years.
Okay. And you were aware of the problems facing Martin County Water District before your appointment to the board?
Yes.
So you described the outage in January and what happened, and a little bit about how you couldn't deal with the crisis because of your cash basis with Sol Electric, I think?
Yeah, we did deal with it. We called Souls Electric and begged them to let us have the other pump and worked out a payment plan with them. That's what Ms. Sumter was talking about, working on a payment plan with them.
Okay. And so you couldn't, you also described in your Facebook post and explaining to customers that because you're on a cash basis, you're being prevented from carrying on operations as normal and
Yes.
being able to repair. Also in your Facebook statement, you referred to what the commissioner had asked Ms. Sumter about your contract with Prestonsburg on your lease and contract. And in your statement on Facebook, you said that the contract was to be signed.
That was before their commission met. We negotiated, the previous board, the previous chairman negotiated that contract, worked on it for 6 or 8 months. Their attorney wrote the contract. When it came to their meeting, they would not have a vote to sign it. We need to work on that. I'm not sure what the issue is. The mayor of Prestonsburg came to our meeting and offered to buy the tank. That's not an option. It can't be sold because it was part of a grant loan. So it needs to be leased, and we came right up to this point thinking this was going to happen. I don't know what changed, but after the new board was sworn in, something has changed.
You mentioned that in your opinion, the water district would only be viable for 60 to 90 days if it didn't receive emergency rate increase. Do you think that an increase of about 75,116, which is 49%, the potential monthly amount that you could receive if granted the full increase, do you think that would allow you to meet your payroll?
It would definitely allow us to meet our payroll. It would also allow us to start working on paying some of our vendors so we can start operating as a business. This has never and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, it's never been operated completely as a business. It's never had to pay its own bills. We've always just let the payables stack up. Collections haven't been focused on. We focused on getting water. I say we, as in the past people. We focused on getting water to the customers and not focused on the actual make this a viable business. And we have to do that in the future, and this will allow us to get on that track.
Do you understand that the chairman made a statement at the beginning of the hearing that these rates would be temporary based on what staff conducts their investigation? And okay. No further questions.
Ms. Cromer? Mr.
Thank you, Your
Gardner?
Honor. Hi, Chairman Horn. Let's start over. So, were you told why 4 of the 5 members quit?
Not specifically. I have some idea.
And what is your idea?
They were tired of fighting the fight.
And so, setting aside the crisis, how often does the board meet?
We have a monthly meeting. Lately, we've had several special meetings, which I believe you've been at all of them.
And those have mostly dealt with the water crisis. But now that the crisis is over, does the board intend to continue meeting more often than monthly?
We intend to have our monthly meeting and special meetings as needed. We're going to try to have those on Saturday morning so everybody that wants to attend can.
Thank you for that. How often do you interact with Mr. Hammond?
Several times a week.
And is that level of interaction due to the crisis, or do you expect that to continue?
I expect that to continue.
Does the board provide any kind of daily financial oversight at this point?
No.
Would the current board be able to provide daily financial oversight?
I would say more like nightly.
But would the current board be able to provide nightly?
We intend to have a special meeting to talk about that.
And what would the goal be? Best case scenario, what do you hope to be able to do?
Best business practices. We need to see where our money's going, see that we're spending the correct amount of money on each individual expense. We need to make sure that all things are addressed, such as not only expendables or maintenance and repair items, but uniforms and health insurance and wages and everything.
So you said that you interact and observe Mr. Hammond on a fairly regular basis.
I don't think I said observe.
You interact with Mr. Hammond on a fairly regular basis. Is that correct? Do you understand his duties to include the daily oversight of the district's finances?
Yes.
And what are his duties regarding that?
His duties are to approve all expenses, to do the purchasing on the larger items, to make sure that expenditures are proper business expense.
And have you spent enough time with him to form an opinion as to whether he is performing those duties?
I don't think in 2 weeks I could possibly form that opinion.
Are you aware that KRS 740-040 authorizes the board to appoint a chief executive officer for the water district?
No. I'm aware that our bylaws allow us to hire a general manager.
And can you describe for me how you understand the difference between, I believe there are 2 managers, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you tell us who those 2 managers are?
Joe Hammonds and John Mills.
And can you explain what the difference in their duties is?
John Mills is an operations guy. His job is to make sure we get water to our customers, take care of the system, make repairs, make sure water comes out the tap at your house. Joe's job is the business side of the business, the spending, the payroll approval, all those types of things, receivables.
Just one moment. No further questions.
Commissioner Matthews, question?
I'm going to try this. The contract with Prestonsburg, and that, the terms of that were included in your rate application, correct? I've tried to follow those adjustments as best I can. There was the $15,000 per month of actual write you a check and hand it to you, for lack of a better word, correct?
Yes.
And then there was $62,792 per year that will not be sold to Prestonsburg. Water that will not be sold.
Correct.
I believe that adjustment was made as well. There was $24,603 of find that one. Purchased water that will not be purchased from Prestonsburg. And then the estimate was $21,640 per year that would not be spent on power to pump to that area. So when I add that up, it looks like that's about $163,451 that's at stake with this signing or not signing this
Correct.
contract.
And our intentions were to try to get a short-term loan based on those receivables.
Do you know when Prestonsburg meets, when the city council meets again?
It meets the first something of every month. It's the first week of February.
Have you had any has anyone had any conversations that would lead them to believe that they will or will not sign that contract?
They are taking the stance right now that they really want to purchase that tank, and we can't sell it to them. So we're going to try before their next meeting to sit down with their chairman and their general manager and discuss this in detail. We've negotiated way too long not to sign at this point.
Okay. That was all I had.
Mr. Horn, I'm glad that you said what you did earlier about trying to get the water district in a position to be run like a business. Because ultimately, it appears to me that the failure of the water district has been, as you say, because it has never been run like a business, at least not in the last 15 or 20 years. Would you agree with that?
I would.
I mean, the thing is, it's just a comment, I guess, or a sermon from me. We see all the time local government failures because people refuse, for whatever reason, to keep their rates at a sufficient level to basically, over the long term, provide good water service, safe water service for the citizens. So in the short term, people pay less, the infrastructure goes to hell in a handbasket, and then suddenly it's like this. There's no money, there's no water, and people are faced with a 50% water bill increase, and you say, what happened? And what happened is that basically local government was unable or unwilling, really, to provide for people's needs by looking out for everybody in the long term. And I just can't. This isn't the only system that has had some of these issues. But I will tell you this. This is by far the worst water district, in my opinion, in the state of Kentucky. The worst run. We want to help you, and we want to help you be successful. But I will tell you this. As somebody pointed out, Ms. McCoy, and others on all these Facebook sites, this has gone on for years and years and years. And in past, there's been, 2 or 3 past Public Service Commission investigations. And it just goes on, and people say, well, it's their problem, let them fix it. I can tell you right now, this stops. We're going to fix it because this district's financial position and its inability to provide water service to its citizens. Right now, under the law, the Public Service Commission could basically put this district into receivership. And if you can't fix it within a reasonable period of time, we're going to do it. I can tell you that right now. Either that or force a merger with somebody else. Because I don't know if the people in Martin County care about who provides the water. They just want water. And if Prestonsburg can provide it by buying your system or an investor-owned utility, or merging with Mountain Water District or somebody else, that has to be a solution, because somebody has to provide these people with water. You can't have, I mean, I know the system shape when I was the school board attorney in Martin County. We couldn't even get, Mr. McCoy knows, we thought we were going to lose the school for a time until Hal Rogers and some others, Governor Beshear, came up with money to run the water lines, because we couldn't have a high school. We had to be able to provide water to meet the state regulations and statutes. I mean, at some point, you know, everybody wants Martin County to grow and succeed. I'm a neighbor. I've got relatives in Martin County. But it's got to be fixed. And I hope you can do it. And we're going to give you a reasonable chance to do it. But at some point, and in the ratepayers too, you can't have, as you know, you've got $800,000 plus in accounts payable and $650,000 in accounts receivable. And sometime over time, those bills needed to be collected, or water service had to be discontinued, because you run a business. I mean, if you didn't collect the people that owed you, could you stay in business very long?
60 days.
You've only been a commissioner for 9 months. Have you had the commissioner training, the new commissioner training?
No, I need it.
And I guess none of the other people have. I ask our staff here. We have undertaken in the last couple of months a program to put together a commissioner training and have a defined program with courses that must be taught. And we're going to ensure that people are teaching these courses and people are competent to teach them. We're not going to let anybody other than us do it. But I asked this morning of our staff of where we were in terms of new commissioner training, because I wanted to be able to offer it to you and your staff as soon as possible. And I was advised that this spring, probably maybe April, May, we were going to provide it in eastern Kentucky, somewhere Prestonsburg, Paintsville, Pikeville, just so that your commissioners could get the essential training they need in terms of the required business practices and to meet the Kentucky regulations. And I'd encourage you and the other members of the Martin County Water District to please try to attend, because there's a special part of that program, 12 hours just for new commissioners. Okay?
Okay.
I would tell you this, because some people run afoul more than you'd suspect. But if you're able, with this rate increase, or perhaps with making a deal with Prestonsburg on the water tank, to be able to obtain a loan. Any loan in excess of 2 years must be approved by the commission. So please don't get into that state, because what would happen would be, we've had so much of that in the past, we're holding commissioners personally responsible for civil penalties. So we like to be generous and we want to help, but you've got to try to comply as well, okay? What is the status, in your opinion, Mr. Horn, of water service to the Martin County schools, especially those on the Buck Creek side of the mountain, over the Warfield, Wolf Creek area?
With the problems that we fixed in the last 2 weeks, water supply to the schools now is good. I think we only actually missed 1 or 2 days of school over water, and then we had bad weather, snow and ice.
I know, in your financial condition, you may not be able to do this, but is there a supply of water other than what you can generate internally that might be available to that area? Could you purchase water from Kermit or Mingo County or Pike County or something?
We purchased a lot of water from Prestonsburg, Mountain Water, and Kermit during that time. Purchased is probably the wrong word, because I don't think we can pay them, but we hooked up to them and got water.
The reason I ask is that I saw somewhere, I mean, we've got a whole notebook full of all of these I guess, Twitter and Facebook and newspaper articles from the Mountain Citizen, and I thought indicating that maybe that the water district had refused to purchase water or something.
I didn't see
Kermit,
any of
is any of
those
that
posts
correct?
that were correct, and I didn't pay much attention to them, honestly.
So you have your pump, correct? You got the pump that was a COD?
Yes. We've got a long-range plan on the river intake that we're going to try to obtain grant money to help us change to, so we'll have a backup system. We need to move our intake 100 yards down the river to get out of a sandbar, so we can have gravity-fed water into the raw water intake instead of pumping it in.
Have you had trouble with vandalism? I saw in one article somebody had shot a hole in one of the water tanks.
Yeah, and then somebody said, well, that hole's old. Well, there's actually 14 holes in that tank, and one of them was new. We've repaired 14 holes in that tank over the years. We're going to put a target on the rock beside of it and say, please shoot here.
With that, I'll quit. No further questions. Mr. Cumbo, anything further? Staff? May this witness be excused? Thank you. You may step down. Do you have another witness, Mr. Cumbo?
Can we take a break?
Yeah. Yes, we'll take a break for, let's take a 15-minute break. We'll come back at 25 until noon. Thank you.
Mr. What?
We're now back on the record. Mr. Cumbo, do you have another witness?
Commissioner, the commission's order directed that our treasurer be present. He is here, Jimmy Don Kerr. I don't know that he could add anything, but if the commission wants to hear from him, we can certainly bring him.
I think you better put him on.
He's got about 2 weeks' experience.
Well, that's okay. That's Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Hey, please be seated. You may ask, Mr. Kimball.
Can you state your name for the record?
It's James D. Kerr.
Tell the commission what you do for a living.
I'm a small business owner. I own a mortgage company called My Hometown Mortgage.
How long have you done that?
I've been in the banking industry for 20 plus years. I've owned my own business for about 5.
And when did you become a commissioner?
About 2 weeks ago, roughly. I'm not sure. It was early January sometime.
How's that working out for you?
Same thing Mr. Horn said. Great.
As I understand it, your position, not only as you are a commissioner, but you're also the treasurer.
Yes, sir.
Would you tell the commission your familiarity with the financial circumstances of the district?
I mean, it's limited, but I mean, I have got a general idea. I mean, I'm still in the process of really digging into all of it, but it is not good based on what I've reviewed.
You've heard testimony from Linda Sumter and from Mr. Horn about the precariousness of our financial position and whether or not we can continue operations for any significant period of time absent a rate increase. Do you have any opinions to offer in that regard?
Just that I agree with their assessment, probably more so with Mr. Horn's. I believe that we're probably 60 to 90 days at best before we really have a problem.
All the questions I have for this witness.
Hi, Mr. Kerr.
Hello.
I understand you've only had a short time as board member, but do you live in Martin County?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And have you been a customer of Martin County Water District?
I have pretty much my whole life.
Okay. So you were aware of the problems before you became
I was.
board member? Okay. What made you decide to take on?
Well, I'll tell you the truth, and it's going to be really corny, but this is the truth. Mr. Horn approached me about it, and I told him he was out of his mind. And he said, well, just think about it. And so I did for about 2 to 3 weeks. And the truth is, I was sitting there looking at my kids. They're 11 and 9. And I asked myself the question, or I guess, well, I didn't really ask myself the question. I just thought, I don't want them to come to me in 20 more years and say, Daddy, our water's causing cancer, our financial situation is bad, they're cutting our water off, it's all this. and say, and you had the expertise and the ability to help, and you did not. And I just didn't want to have to answer that question to them. And I think it's important, I think Mr. Horn has stated this before, but it is important that people from our generation, or from all generations, our job is to try to ensure that the next generation is better off than we were. And if there is a problem with our water system, then it's up to us to try to fix it. And we need some people in from our generation to step up, and so that's why.
Okay, thank you. So, were you a member of the board at the January 4th board meeting? Were you involved in the vote to file for this RF application at all?
Yes, I think that was actually my first meeting.
Okay, all right. So, have you read this application, or
I have not.
you don't?
I mean, I probably have reviewed it at some point in the board meeting, but as far as actually read it through, that was probably Mr. Horn.
Okay. And so, you were at the first meeting where they talked about this RF application, but were you involved in the decision to ask for emergency rates?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And is that based on your financial assessment as a banker?
Based on my financial assessment and just information provided us from our consultants, from our accountants, just the information, as much information as I could gather in that short period of time, it was pretty clear that that's what needed to happen.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Gardner?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Mr. Kerr, your statement of stepping up was very moving, and appreciate your service.
Yes, sir.
To the citizens
Thank you.
of Martin County. I do have one question. At a special meeting of the board, did you indicate that if you were a banker, you wouldn't lend money to Martin County at this time?
I did.
Okay, that's all.
Mr. Matthews?
Nothing.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand exactly the last question. You indicated at some point that if you were a banker, you wouldn't loan money to the water district?
What was asked is what if we had a chance to maybe borrow money with the $15,000 that we could potentially receive from the lease with Prestonsburg. And what I was asked was what banks do is they manage risk. That's how they make their lending decisions. And we are as high risk as it gets. I wouldn't loan us money if I was on the other side.
Well, I guess there's not much else to say about that.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a little tweak of that question?
Yes, you may.
Would if there were sufficient, I heard you say that you wouldn't loan money to them if you were a bank. If there were incredibly strict controls, are there circumstances in which you might, on the flow of the new money going in and plus some on the old, are there certain circumstances in which you might consider a loan?
Yes, I mean.
And you're a banker. Are you familiar with lenders making loans to bankrupt companies while they were in bankruptcy?
Not that I have been involved in,
Okay,
no.
all right.
Mr. Gardner brings up an interesting point. We have on occasion had utilities who, gas and others, small utilities that needed cash or needed a loan but couldn't get a loan, and we provided some rate increases or surcharges with the restriction in the order that an escrow account or some type of special account be established where that money is held, so that basically they would be able possibly to get a loan with the understanding that money and that cash flow would be used to pay off the loan. And I suppose that's possible. I know you've got a local bank, but Mr. Duncan would probably require some security.
I would say you're right.
He's a customer too, right?
Yes, sir.
No further questions. Mr. Cumbo, anything?
No further questions.
Anything further? May this witness be excused?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You may stand down. Mr. Cumbo, do you have any other witness?
Greg Heitzman.
Will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. Mr. Cumbo, you may ask.
Mr. Heitzman, would you introduce yourself to the commission, please?
Yes, my name is Greg Heitzman. and I'm president of Blue Water Kentucky.
And you briefly offered testimony in a companion case, Mr. Heisman, but I think for the record we need to introduce in this case your background, education, experience.
Yes. My education is I have a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering, a Master's of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Kentucky. I have a Master's in Business Administration from the University of Louisville. I've been in the water industry for about 35 years, the majority of time of which was in a management role, serving as chief engineer of the Louisville Water Company for about 17 years, serving as president of the Louisville Water Company for 6 years, serving as executive director of Louisville Metropolitan Sewer District for 3 years. And then in 2016, after I retired, I formed a management consulting firm that focuses in the water wastewater sector.
And in that area, how are you affiliated with the Martin County Water District?
I was approached by the district to consider providing a proposal to the district to assist with management and operational review. And I entered into a contract at the beginning of June of 2017 and have been serving the district and I've now provided a set of recommendations to the board for their consideration of taking action on. That the board has approved those set of recommendations, and the next step for us is essentially developing an action plan to begin to implement those recommendations over a period of time.
I'm not sure you're aware, but that draft was filed in the companion case, and so the commission has had those recommendations before it.
And maybe we'll make a clarification is the recommendations were in draft form as early as the end of November. Worked with the previous chair on taking those to the board at the end of November. And I think as the commission and others are aware, the board members resigned, has been another testimony. And so essentially they were kind of put on hold essentially until we could get to the point with a new board, and they were presented initially on January 4th at the board meeting, the same day that the rate filing was approved. The board then had the ability to review those over a week and then came back. We did a full presentation on the details of those recommendations, and then the board took action to accept those recommendations and then direct us further into the next steps with respect to developing an action plan and putting some of these action steps in place.
As part of doing that process, did you have an opportunity to become familiar with the finances of the district?
Yes, I did.
Would you describe for the commission your understanding of the finances of the district?
Well, I'll give a little background of what I've reviewed. At the time we started, there was a 2015 audit, financial audit of record, and I have not seen a 2016 audit at this point, but we did have 2016 financials available. And then I've also had the ability to review the ongoing financial reports on a monthly basis since June of 2017 through December. And in reviewing of those, essentially, we're not taking in an adequate amount of revenue in order to be able to cover our expenses. Essentially, I think is well documented. And we testified before this commission that essentially we are having significant difficulty in meeting our creditor obligations and on a timely basis, and we have significant accounts payable that generally in the latter part of 2017 we were holding them steady, doing a good job with expense cuts, reducing some of our water loss, et cetera, which obviously if you reduce water loss, you don't have to pay for additional power and chemicals, et cetera. So we were generally holding our own at about $750,000. And Then the winter emergency came along that we've had, that we've talked about recently, and essentially with the overtime and other expenses, that has begun to grow again. So all that to say is for the period of review that I have looked at since 15, essentially we're in a very dire, very significant financial crisis, and that we need an immediate cash infusion in order to begin, not to correct, but begin to correct the problem. This is, as I've testified before, and I think even today there's a recognition by the commissioners that even with a supplemental rate increase, there's not an infusion of immediate cash. Essentially, there'll be additional funds that come in that can go to our priority accounts, but it's going to take some time for us to be able to dig out of this hole that we're in.
Do you have an opinion as to whether the operations of the district will be materially impaired or damaged if the emergency rate increase does not become effective?
Yes, in my professional opinion, without the additional infusion of cash from a rate increase or other sources, and I can elaborate what we've done to pursue other sources, we will not be able to meet our obligations to provide safe drinking water to our community, to the customers of Martin County.
You mentioned other sources of revenue. Tell the commission, if you would, your understanding of those efforts.
We've attempted to tackle a number of issues. I think for those that are well aware of how to operate a utility, there's essentially basically two types of expenses: operating expenses and then capital expenses. Talk a little bit about capital first. We have looked at opportunities and have filed for requests for grant assistance. And we've been successful to date with one grant, a $1.2 million grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission to be able to focus on replacing leaking and failing service lines and under-registering meters to our customers. That'll address about 1,000 of these service lines. So that's good news. We believe we have an estimated 3,000 to address. So that's roughly about a third of the need. And so that process is underway with our engineer, Kentucky Engineering Group, doing the design. We expect to have that project essentially out on the street, bid this spring. And the good part about a service line replacement project, it's more of a unit price approach. So what we can do is go in and tackle the most severe areas one by one. Now, it's going to take some time, but over the next 18 months, we'll be able to address about a third of the services. So that's an example of what we're doing on the capital side. Now, grant money cannot be used for operations. Essentially, the grantors, federal government, state government, et cetera, require that to go into an asset investment. What's important to understand, however, is that we are not operating efficiently. That's clear. And part of the reason is because of the failing infrastructure. So as we begin to infuse capital on the side, grants or proceeds from the rate increase, depreciation, et cetera, that will allow us to essentially be able to operate more efficiently and reduce our operating expenses over time, which will be good. So the capital side, we've also applied for grant funding from the Abandoned Mine Lands Program. That's currently being under review. The board last year, I believe it was in the October-November timeframe, approved a recommended list from the engineer, Kentucky Engineering Group, a recommended list of about, if I recall correctly, $7.8 million worth of immediate capital need. We do need a longer-term plan beyond that, but essentially it was comprised of projects we've talked about: service lines, main replacement, a control system known as SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System, that helps manage the system electronically, and then the intake structure, a new line to the reservoir, and a reliable supply to the treatment plant. So that's the grant, kind of a summary of the grant side that we have been pursuing, and thus far we've had some good success with that. Let's go to the operations side of the house. Essentially, on the operating side, we recognize that the revenues currently aren't adequate, so therefore the district engaged the services of Kentucky Rural Water Association and their expertise, and an individual by the name of Alan Valines, who has many years, 30 years experience with doing this type of work. So Alan conducted a rate analysis, rate study that has now been filed with the Commission to be able to identify the various expenses and revenues associated. The test year, as everyone's well aware of, is 2016 because the 2017 data was not complete. Original intention was to get this filed in November, was our hope, but it is now filed in January due to the board leadership changes. So that's underway. We expect that the Commission will go through our 2017 expenses as well, and there'll need to be some adjustments associated with it that may increase or decrease the various categories. So with the standard practice, the test year is 2016, then there are adjustments to build a pro forma or a projection of what would be needed for 2018. And I'm familiar with that process, having done that for the Louisville Water Company and Louisville Metro Sewer District, albeit on a much larger scale. But the expertise for small rural systems is coming from the Kentucky Rural Water Association. So Kentucky Rural Water prepared the rate increase, the rate analysis, and the recommended rate increase. I reviewed that and helped facilitate the process with the board. So essentially that analysis was performed by Rural Water. I reviewed it, very familiar with it. We presented it to the board on the 4th with a PowerPoint presentation that if it has not been provided to the Commission, we can provide it, but the details of the actual rate increase have been filed. So obviously a rate increase is one component of what we have been pursuing, and that started back in June of this past year. Now, what else could we do? We looked at other opportunities to generate revenue, which the previous board was already in discussions with Prestonsburg about different options that would be available regarding the tank, what we'll refer to as the airport tank, and that system provides water service to the federal prison. And obviously the federal prison is a very good customer, large user. There's an operating agreement that has been in place for over 15 years to essentially share the revenue that would come from the federal prison. And when that original agreement was put together in concept, essentially is Prestonsburg to provide 50% of the water. Martin County would provide 50% of the water. That would generate revenue for both. The initial investments that were made were funded with some grant proceeds, so there are some restrictions with respect to what we can do with those assets. But the idea essentially was generating positive revenue, a win-win for all three parties. Win-win-win. Federal prison, a reliable water supply with a backup from two independent sources, and revenue for both. The reality of the situation is because of the failing infrastructure, the management practices of the district, et cetera, for all practical purposes, Martin County has not been able to uphold its portion of its obligations, and Prestonsburg has stepped in and provided the majority of the water supply to the federal prison over that period of time. There has been some intermittent. A good example is last year we were making progress, again with the assistance of Kentucky Rural Water and their technicians, in being able to repair some of the leaks. And we were actually getting to the point in the period of August, September, October timeframe that we would not have to run the treatment plant, the production facilities, 24 hours a day. We were actually backing that off to 16, 17 hours a day, which is good. That means we're not leaking as much, and we're able to sell some of that now reserved capacity. And that capacity was going on a limited basis. We never got to 50%, but on a limited basis to the federal prison. Therefore, Prestonsburg, the prison is Prestonsburg's customer, so they were then able to remit to the district some offset payments, or essentially revenue as a result of that contract. But we were still not able to do it on a consistent basis. And clearly with the winter emergency, the reverse happens. That agreement also has the ability for Prestonsburg to supply Martin County. And essentially Martin County has been taking during this emergency a significant amount of water to supplement the district where it's feasible. They've also, a side note, they've also obtained water from the Mountain Water District as well as Kermit as well during that emergency period. So there were efforts made by the staff, the management, and the previous board to do everything it could to reduce the leakage, to free up capacity, to be able to get revenue from the prison. And we had several months with some good numbers coming in. That additional revenue was helping us preventing that accounts payable from growing at that period of time compared to what it's growing now. The tank, I then was asked to take a look at the tank sale versus the tank lease. And I looked at it having a lot of experience with Louisville Water in working with adjacent systems and service territories, et cetera, that a lease option often is a viable alternative to get two parties to be able to work together over a period of time, be able to build trust, build a relationship, both parties are accountable. That's one of the positives of a lease arrangement, whereas if there is a single transaction, there's a relationship at that point in time, but then it could degrade over time. So one of the soft benefits of a lease arrangement is you have an ongoing relationship building between two organizations, two entities, in this case Prestonsburg, which has a reliable supply of good water, as well as the district. The other is the concern about, do we have the ability to actually even sell an asset of that size? Martin County has customers in that area as well, and so we would also have to evaluate essentially the release of the obligation that we currently have to those customers. Now, there's not very many at this point in time, but about 30 or so. That area also serves the industrial park that has growth opportunities in the future. So, in my opinion, a sale is an option. So we have three options: do nothing, keep the same contract, do everything we can to supply our share of the water supply and get our share of the prison revenue. So that's one option, of which, quite frankly, we don't have the ability to do right now. Second would be to sell the tank and essentially negotiate a fair price and then sell it to, contingent upon approvals of X, Y, and Z from the various entities, including the Public Service Commission and granting authorities. Third, a lease arrangement that would be an option, a viable option, to be able to generate some revenue as a substitute, keeping all other options open, including a sale down the road. So I recommended to the chair at the time, let's look at a 5-year lease agreement with the ability to renew it for an additional 5 years, with the concept coupled with my other recommendations that the objective is 5 years from now we're a well-run utility, and at that point in time we may be in a position to share in that revenue that was in the original contract. So what does a lease do compared to a sale? A lease should be able to be executed quicker, shorter period of time. There's more flexibility with the approvals between the two authorities, City of Prestonsburg and the district itself. Provides an immediate cash infusion. What was negotiated was a $15,000 a month stream of revenue. In addition to that, 625,000 gallons of water at no charge to the district to serve those customers in that area, which accommodates some additional growth. The benefit of that, as was pointed out by Ms. Matthews earlier in this testimony, essentially there are some offsets. So $15,000 times 12, $180,000 is not the full benefit. There's some adjustments, both positive and negative, that give about a net cash benefit of about $163,000 on an annual basis. But this is what this really does. Essentially, it reduces the demand obligation that we have, because right now we're leaking like a sieve. And what it does is it frees up our resources that we don't have to operate those facilities to go to more urgent needs. It allows us to be able to continue providing reliable water from Prestonsburg to our customers. So it's really a win-win in my judgment, and that is what I recommended to the board to pursue. And as I think folks are aware, is that has been under negotiation for the past 6 months or so. I was not a party to the negotiation meeting, but I was briefed by Mr. Harvey, the previous board chair, that it contained the $15,000 as a monthly payment and the 625,000 gallons at no charge. And those are the two fundamental elements, with the details to be worked out. I have worked with Mr. Cumbo, with you, on the various language of what a typical standard lease type arrangement would be. And again, it's a proposed 5-year lease with the ability to renew it by mutual agreement of both parties for another 5 years, with the idea that with the help of the City of Prestonsburg, we're able to provide reliable service to the prison and to the district's customers in that area. So that has been testified, is in the hands right now of the City of Prestonsburg. My understanding is they prefer a sale of the tank. And the chairman, Mr. Horn, and I have talked about getting a meeting before their next commission meeting to explain what I've explained here as to the benefit of a lease, still protecting all the options down the road to be able to provide some emergency relief. So that additional income coming into us on the order of 100, say on an average basis, $160,000 a year, could then be used in one of two ways. One, it could be used to on a monthly basis, start paying down some of our accounts payable, but it also could be used to secure potentially a loan. So at the board meeting, I recommended to the board, and they agreed and directed the staff and Mr. Larimore, who is the executive director of Kentucky Rural Water. So there was two directions that came from the board to us. One was to direct the business manager to pursue a loan from any lending institution that would be available, recognizing that this is a very high risk. And then second, directing myself and Mr. Larimore to go to the state to pursue any available funding alternatives that could be used on a short-term basis. And so we have done that, and if the commission would like to hear it, I can elaborate on what we have found out today from Mr. Larimore and myself. So the second item here is looking for a cash infusion by taking an asset and that has not been effectively fully utilized by the district because of its current financial and operating condition, and allowing another entity, the City of Prestonsburg, to make full use of that, but also being able to receive revenue. So my view is that's a win-win solution for the communities and the customers. The other alternatives that we have looked at certainly that are secondary in nature and are included in the recommendations, looking at other supplemental fees, looking at our sewer revenue, et cetera. But those are lower priority at this point in time compared to the other opportunities that face us. So long answer to a question, but again, capital versus O&M and what we're doing on the revenue side that can help us on that, on the essentially addressing the accounts payable situation.
I guess the crux of the matter, Mr. Heisman, is there anything that's going to happen in that regard within the next 3 to 6 months that's going to alleviate this crisis for the district?
No, excuse me. If any, I'm concerned about continuing cascading failures that would make it, that would essentially be worse. Such as the event we've recently had with the frozen intake pump and with colder water temperatures, more breaks and leaks, et cetera. So that would be my concern. We're in January, into January now, and we will probably have another spell of cold weather. And if that happens, we continue to be vulnerable. So that did lead to a recommendation from both Mr. Larimore and myself to the board to file this rate increase, 49.5%, but we advise the board that this process can take 6, 8, 9 months for the appropriate review and diligence by the commission. Therefore, that is why the cover letter includes a request for an emergency rate increase to deal with the crisis that is at hand. Elaborate a little bit, Mr. Larimore and I discussed whether we should ask the commission for a specific number. Mr. Horn and Mr. Kerr will recall that we talked about, as an example, could we get a 25%, roughly half of the full amount, as one alternative to be able to get us going. After some discussion with Mr. Larimore, what we decided to do is let this hearing take its course. Let the commission determine, it has the expertise and the precedent, et cetera, determine what an appropriate emergency rate increase would be, fully understanding, and the board fully understands. We advise them that there will be a true-up, there will be an adjustment. It could be positive or negative based upon the findings of the commission. So we're here today essentially to start this journey to evaluate the justification for an emergency rate increase while we're in parallel working the process for what would be a permanent rate adjustment to stabilize the finances of the district.
Okay. There has been, shifting gears a little bit, some questions about the operating expenses of the district. Have you reviewed those?
I'm sorry?
The operating expenses of the district?
Yes, have I?
Have you reviewed those operating?
Yes.
Are you familiar with them?
Yes.
Are any of those operating expenses, in your opinion, out of line with comparable districts in the size of Martin County Water District?
I would answer this in two ways. First of all, the operating expenses are high. They're relatively high, but in my judgment, for good reason, because of the situation we're in. And I'll elaborate a little bit on that is, for example, many of our suppliers are COD. Obviously, suppliers are not going to give us discounts, et cetera. So there is clearly room for us to be able to improve our expenses. However, right now, we don't have any choice. We're paying a premium for supplies, and because of the condition of our infrastructure, we're paying a premium for labor, when overtime, for example. So there's clearly an opportunity over time as we make investments to be able to improve what I would look at as our operating cost ratios. Now, for the size of the district, in my judgment, depending on how we slice this, what the denominator is, whether it's total operating expenses including depreciation, or whether it's just total O&M expenses, the data that was discussed earlier today is $2 million versus $2.8 million, and whether we're at 30% or 40%, essentially both of those are good metrics. In my professional judgment, they're reasonable in comparison to other similar size systems. This is not a large system. We don't have a significant economy of scale, et cetera. But I think the real key is because of the current state of the infrastructure and the operations and the management, we are operating at a premium. And so in relative to where we can be in the future. And it's going to be a period of time before we get to a point where we can have an efficiently run system and to be able to trim our operating costs as a percentage of trim our labor costs and our operating costs as a percent of our total revenue. And that has been considered in the rate filing as we made the assumptions for the pro forma as we went through. So from my perspective, they're reasonable where we are now, but clearly there's opportunities for us to be able to improve.
I think that's all the questions I have, Mr. Heitzman. Unless there's something else you feel like you need to add.
Ms. Koenig, questions?
Yes. Hi, Mr. Heitzman. I understand from your testimony that you're involved in the other case, 2016-142, the other
yes, I am.
investigation case. And so just as a matter of clearing things up, I think you've made some recommendations in that case that you talked about. Maybe you started in October of last year, and that you can go ahead and he's going to show you an exhibit that has not been filed into the record. Are those your recommendations that were presented to the board that you referred to?
Yes, I'll clarify one point for the record is I was retained to provide this set of recommendations. So I began to do my baseline assessment, my due diligence work, from June, July, August, et cetera. And the initial draft was provided to Mr. Harvey late October. So essentially, and he began to review it, testified earlier, but then it was delayed. So what I've received and have in my possession is a dated January 4th set of recommendations that were delivered to the district's board.
Okay. I'd like to make that commission's exhibit. Are we up to 3 or is that 2? Okay.
Is that 3? Any objections? If not, let it be marked and filed as exhibit, is it 2? Commission Exhibit 2?
And Mr. Heitzman, several of your recommendations in the January 4th presentation to the board are incorporated into the ARF application. You said that you and Mr. Valines
Yes.
prepared the ARF application
Yes.
at issue here? Okay. So we have, just for the record, the order setting this hearing incorporated the 2016 142 record into our case, but those recommendations had not been previously put in the record. Is that correct? The Exhibit 2 have not been previously put in the record?
No, they were, previous testimony, as part of the record, is I testified to my preliminary observations and a general summary of some of the preliminary recommendations.
Okay.
And that is part of the record. And I believe that meeting was back in October. And I had testified that I would be finalizing those and then delivering them, within that next 30 days.
Okay.
Essentially.
All right.
But they were not. This list was not of the record at that time. So
Okay.
you are correct, but it's an obligation to deliver this set of recommendations, as I testified before. Plan was to deliver those to the board in November and then have them filed before the end of the year.
Okay.
But with the board changed, it was pushed into January.
Okay. So is that the same reason part of your recommendations were to file for an increase in rates or a surcharge?
Yes.
And is that the same reason why the ARF application had been delayed until January?
Yes, in part, part of the recommendations, one of the recommendations essentially evaluate all options related to a rate increase, including surcharge, base rate, et cetera. And so those were all working in parallel. So I was working in coordination, cooperation with the Kentucky Rural Water Resources for the rate filing, essentially in parallel with development of these recommendations.
Okay. So in October, you knew that the rates weren't adequate enough to meet the demands?
That is correct.
And how far back would you say you knew that the rates were not?
I would say I put it this way, I was advised of the financial situation of the district immediately once I got under contract, and then began to look at the 2015 audit and then begin discussions with Ms. Sumter, the CPA. So I would say that my conclusions were recognizing the need for a rate increase began to be realized by myself in the August-September timeframe,
Okay.
that this was a significant issue.
Okay. And so you said that you had advised the Martin County Water Board to put in the cover letter to ask for emergency rates?
We presented the full rate analysis to the board on January 4th, and with the assistance of Mr. Larimore, who directs Kentucky Rural Water and provides services across the state for rural systems, that there is an option that we could consider emergency rate relief. So we discussed that with the board, and the board authorized us to pursue the emergency rate relief in addition to the normal rate filing.
Okay. Did the January crisis have anything to do with you asking for the emergency rate increase? Or was the decision made before that?
The decision was made on the 4th, and essentially this was concurrent. On the meeting on the 4th, after the meeting, I met with Mr. Mills, John Mills, the operations manager. And at that point in time, because the severe weather started coming into the area right that week, essentially rising concerns because of the condition of the infrastructure were on his radar screen. And in fact, in that meeting in his office, he was making arrangements that day to be able to get the backup pump returned or to rent a pump for the situation. So to your question specifically, when I made the recommendations for the alternative filing here for an emergency rate increase, it was based predominantly on the accounts payable situation, the financial position of the district, and not the emergency. The emergency that we have experienced over the last 3 weeks have just made it worse.
Okay. And the accounts payable situation that you're referring to included the electric bill and being able to meet the current operational demands?
Yes. And I would add is, in talking with Ms. Sumter, so if you would look at our accounts payable status through the fall, you would see it's fairly level. You know, we're keeping it contained but not working it down. Whereas with the overtime, the additional expenses for materials to repair the leaks, renting pumps, et cetera, that December was up slightly, but then January I would expect will be up as well because of the expenses and the overtime that's been testified to. So we're going to see a bump in our accounts payable just because of this winter emergency over the past 3 weeks.
Okay. Okay, no further questions.
Mr. Cromer, Mr. Gardner?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Heitzen, I'll say that the rate application, which is based on the test year of 2016, notes that for that year operating revenue exceeded expenses by 40%, switch that, by 40%, $820,000.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm going to admit a little confusion on my own part. I went back to the annual reports, and it took me a while to figure out why it wasn't that number for expenses wasn't matching the annual report, and it's, of course, because the depreciation expenses are not reported in the annual report. So if you look at it based on the annual report, the shortfall is closer to $2,000 rather than the $820,000 that.
Excuse me, could you state that again? What was $2,000?
The shortfall between operating revenues and expenses. If you take out depreciation, if you're just looking at operating and maintenance expenses and revenues.
Okay.
So my point is, or my question to you is, you know, I understand that, you know, as a matter of law that you include the depreciation expenses in rate cases. I understand that. But why should they be included on an emergency basis? Why, on an emergency basis, would you need to fund the depreciation account?
Well, from my perspective, good, sound utility practice and the practices of the Public Service Commission are essentially to be able to recover three general areas. Current operating expenses, also our debt obligations, and then depreciation.
Right.
And depreciation is essentially a fund to be able to invest in replacing aging infrastructure.
And that's absolutely important looking forward, but we're talking about the emergency of the next 3 months.
Correct.
So why would depreciation be important to the emergency that is occurring right now?
Well, there's two things going on. On a macro level, when we look at it, macro meaning on annualized basis, the depreciation should be included in the full rate base. On an emergency basis, we did not go in and look and say that we're going to extract out depreciation for the purposes of this emergency rate increase. What we're doing is saying that we can't wait for the full rate increase for 7, 8, or 9 months for that process. So essentially what we're doing is asking the Commission to grant a emergency rate increase to be able to stabilize the finances, the current financial condition of the district, until we get the appropriate rate increase.
So has Mr. Valines, I believe, or yourself, have you done a rate analysis for the emergency rate increase that would not include?
No, we have not. And so essentially you would look at it this way. We're asking for an advance, would be another way to look at this, in order to be able to prevent further financial collapse or prevent an actual financial collapse of the district, which will serve no one's interest. Because on an extended period of time, instead of having water outages from 5 in the afternoon till 5 in the morning, what we're going to have is we're going to have extended periods of absences if we don't have the employees and be able to pay the power, et cetera. It would be days, weeks, and months. So the rationale for the emergency rate increase is based upon the dire financial situation. We did not go through an analysis to look at justifying an emergency rate increase based upon just the operating expenses, which is to your point. We did not do that analysis.
Okay, thank you. And so the reasons for the rate increase, which are provided in the application, there are 7 of them listed. This is for the full 49.5%, $901,000 additional revenue. One of the reasons given is the need for to increase the capacity to ensure compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. Would you say that's an emergency at this moment?
Yes.
Is the district currently in violation of its standards?
As the most recent lab reports and the most recent submittals to the Kentucky Division of Water, they are in compliance.
And I understand that my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is they weren't just in compliance with the MCLs, they are also now in compliance with the annual averages.
That is correct.
Okay, so they're now compliant with the Safe Drinking Water Act.
And that's why I want to clarify, because I asked, is there a reason for this increase for the Safe Drinking Water Act? The reason I'm saying yes is continued failure of the system that will essentially subject the water system to contamination, essentially will lead to violations as a result of having adequate chlorine residual in the pipes, boil water advisories, et cetera. So we are, as of record, as of today, we are in compliance with all of the Safe Drinking Water Act provisions, but we're at risk, at a higher risk as a result of this winter emergency and the financial condition of the district to assure that we will stay in compliance.
Thank you. In your report to the board, you also note that the district is currently co-managed by an office manager and operations manager.
Yes.
Are you referring to Joe Hammond and John Mills?
Yes, ma'am.
Respectively? What challenges are there in having co-managers, if any?
Well, in my experience, that is an unusual arrangement, and one of my recommendations that is in the exhibit that's included here essentially is to hire or appoint a manager, a general manager. That is the more common practice in our water industry in the state and across the country. Have a single point of accountability, and that accountability for the operation, essentially the chief executive reporting directly to the board. So that's the more common practice. By currently managing with a set of co-managers, essentially it is more of a challenge for the board to be able to operate and also to be able to manage on a day-to-day basis. So typical practice is a single, generally it would be called superintendent or general manager or chief executive of the district, and that is one of the recommendations that's included.
Over the last, I guess it's been since October, I believe, that you've been working with the district. How much time have you spent interacting with Joe Hammond?
I would say it's not weekly, but there have been weeks that I would talk to him on multiple occasions with the status, so it's fairly frequently. For example, I had a conversation with him yesterday. So since the new board was put in over the last several weeks, I've talked to him at least weekly, 2 to 3 times a week. There were periods in the fall I would come in and visit, get follow-up information, et cetera, so there may be several weeks that I would not talk to him. But clearly every month since I've been under contract, I've talked to him multiple times on a monthly basis.
Do you understand his duties to include the daily oversight of the district's finances?
The day-to-day management of the finances, yes, but with the previous board had made a decision to use the services of Linda Sumter and her staff in order to be able to assist with the accounts payable. So really, and you heard testimony earlier to that effect of that role, and I think that has been the practice for a number of years.
And so, but where does the oversight lie? Who oversees the daily finance?
Essentially, the daily management of the finances is with Mr. Hammonds.
Do you have an opinion as to how he's performing?
My perspective is he has a very good knowledge of the operations of the district. He has been responsive to me when asked for data and provide data to me. I don't have an opinion as to his proficiency or professionalism or diligence, but in meeting the needs that I have to get information, both he and Ms. Sumter have provided that to me.
In your report to the board, you also note that up through November of 2017, Chairman Harvey had provided extensive leadership and daily managerial assistance in operating the district without compensation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did I say that correctly?
And that,
yeah, can you just give us a
that
little
was
bit?
my observation, and my opinion is this, and leads to some of the recommendations, and I briefed Mr. Horn on this as well, is that Mr. Harvey, because of his background, he was spending a significant amount of time, in my observation, with the district, especially dealing with whether it's a managerial or an operating crisis that would be ongoing. So he was very much involved with the day-to-day operations. I don't want to say daily, but many times, as I've relayed to others, that I would call Joe Hammond on the phone. Many times, Mr. Harvey was there with him. So there was a routine and daily communication between the two to supplement the resource needs of the district, both on operations as well as a management side.
And Chairman Harvey's no longer filling that role.
That is correct. And he, just for clarification, he provided that role at no compensation. So
that was going to be my next question. Do we have any? No further questions.
Commissioner Matthews, questions?
Has your recommendation, and we will likely get into this in the related case, your recommendation, I believe it was yours, that the $1.2 million go for metering and service line replacement.
Yes.
Has that changed because of this most recent crisis with the water intake?
Always with new information, you'd have a new perspective, and to give you a little rationale for the basis, Mr. Larimore and myself, we worked with the state agencies, primarily the Department of Local Government and the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority, and I served 10 years on the board of the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority, having very extensive knowledge of what options are available, state and federal grants. So, in review of the need, we took a $7 million infrastructure need that was high priority to the board, and the approach that we take is, to some degree, a shotgun approach in the sense that we want to put enough flexibility in grant requests that we could size, the grant could be sized to the need. So as an example, if a single project is submitted for $7 million and there's only $1 million available, $1 million out of a project will not complete it, therefore we don't get anything work done. I've seen in my experience many times where grant funding is provided but not fully implemented. We knew that the commission was very much concerned from previous rulings that with water loss. So at the time, we saw the best value to the district, the most immediate value, was doing the service line work. And for a couple reasons. One is service line work is modular. In other words, it's point-based work. You can go in and whether we would receive a $500,000 grant or a $3 million grant, we can size the number of services we do with success based upon the size of the grant. So it provides the maximum amount of flexibility. Whereas the intake structure and the new pumping station, new intake, telemetry, et cetera, to provide a reliable supply, raw water supply to the plant was about $3 million. And from the availability of funds, we chose, and I recommended to the previous board, that we gear that request to ARC, the Appalachian Regional Commission grant, to the service line work. Typically, that ARC grant requires a 20% match, and the district was in no position to be able to come up with a 20% match. We were fortunate that 20% match requirement was waived because of the economic condition of the area. Therefore, we were able to get the $1.2 million to get started. Design work is easier, you get permit work easier, so we can implement, versus an intake structure, a $3 million, more permits, Division of Water approval. It's a 3-year type solution from the time of start to finish, 24 to 30, 36 months. So we saw the immediate benefit. Now, if I knew of record that we would have been awarded $3 million in grant money through ARC, Hindsight's 2020, and I had the winter emergency, I probably would have shifted based upon what would be A, available, if it's available, and B, the winter emergency. But if you request $3 million and you only get $1.2 million, you can't. A half an intake structure is not going to help you out. So with that, what we did is we optimized our approach. So in parallel, there is a filing of record to the Abandoned Mine Lands Grant Program, and the intake structure and the supply line and the pumping station, the telemetry, are part of that grant request that the previous board approved. So that is currently being evaluated by the appropriate state officials to determine if a grant would be awarded to address that area of emergency.
And you think, it says so, so you must think that the replacement of these 1,000 service lines and the meters and the continued work will bring the water loss from the 64% that was in 2016, which is the year of record, to 39%.
That, along with several other efforts. In other words, there's water, non-revenue water falls in the category, certainly water leakage through these leaks, under-register, underperforming meters. When meters fail, they typically run slow. And then the third is essentially we need to do a better job on collections. Water theft is an issue, and we don't have a real good estimate of what percentage is what. But based upon what has been delivered to me and personally seeing photographs, et cetera, of the number of failures of the deficient infrastructure, that the water service line leaks and the under-registering meters essentially are a significant portion. So what's the rationale from going from 64 to 39 versus 15? I testified previously that it will be impossible for us to go in 1 year from 64 to 15. And going from 64 to 40 is going to be easier than going from 40 to 30 and then et cetera. So we actually, this was a recommendation from Alan Valines, is essentially as simple as, instead of coming up with a complex evaluation of how to stair-step that in, let's just split the difference. So it's at 39% is essentially halfway between 64 and the 15 target. And so my belief, to answer your question, is the repair of these services will make significant progress and allow us to get clearly into the 50s, along with other effort, with an objective of getting to 39%. Now, I want to qualify that is because we have already had experience, and I've testified to this effect. You replace the service that's going to customer's A house, and then what happens is the next weakest link in the system might be the neighbor that previously didn't fail, now will fail. So there's going to be initial 100, 200, 300, 400 services that are replaced, and we're not going to see an immediate drop because the system pressures are going to find the next weakest link in infrastructure. This is a very unusual system compared to much area of the state, very high hilly terrain, very high operating pressures, in some cases well over 100 psi. So what happens is operating of the system to avoid tank overflows, better pressure management is now an industry best practice, better manage the pressures between 40 psi and 80 psi. But in some cases, the terrain is so much of a challenge here that essentially high pressures are going to continue to be a challenge that'll drive some of this leakage.
And I know the significance of the 15%, but could you share with everyone else the significance of the 15%?
Well,
That's your target?
Yeah, essentially, the one is the Public Service Commission. There is a requirement, essentially, a better way to describe this is an expectation that 15% of the water is a reasonable amount of water that could be not accounted for in terms of metering or defined estimates. And what that covers is elements of leakage, theft, flushing of the system, et cetera. And so our goal to be compliant with the 15% is essentially going to happen over time. The other situation here is my understanding, the Public Service Commission typically does not allow expenses associated with anything above 15%, the cost of power, the cost of electricity, to be included into the rate base. There's a provision within the statutes to allow for an alternative rate filing, which we have done, that requests permission to stair-step this down. We discussed 3 stair steps or 2. We ultimately chose 2 with the anticipation that we will be able to get a rate increase, be able to continue to get grant funding to help us implement this new practices with collections that were referenced, with water theft, et cetera, to get us to that 39. So our request is to allow us over time a 2-step function from 64, target 39, and then get from 39 to 15.
I have nothing else.
Are you saying that you'd like the commission to allow the district to charge its ratepayers for water they don't get?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
Well,
that?
you're not asking, the water district isn't asking to be permitted to collect through rates water loss in excess of 15%, are you?
With the alternative rate filing, we have included cost assumptions for the pro forma that would cover up to 39%. There is a provision that allows, under extenuating circumstances, for us to petition the commission to request that the power and the chemical costs, what I would call the marginal costs, to be included.
Well, you're not collecting the bills now, are you? I mean, you're not getting it now. Nobody's, apparently a substantial number of people aren't even paying their water bills. And since you've been associated with the district, has any effort been made to collect debts?
Okay, two questions there, provide 2 comments. Is one, you are absolutely correct, that we need to do a better job on accounts receivable. And my belief is the resolve of this board will begin to address that. Now, we also recognize that with accounts receivable of $600,000 or so, that whether we go collection agency, in some cases this is going to go to bad debt eventually, some percentage of it. So we're not going to ever be able, no utility is able to collect all. The bad debt percentage is about 2%, which for this size is reasonable, but we're carrying a large amount of accounts receivable that, to your point, I agree with you, must be addressed, and let us work to be able to get as much of that. You know, if we get 80 cents on the dollar, if we get 50 cents on the dollar, any amount will help us be able to curb. So that's one issue.
I mean, any amount's more than you're getting now.
That is correct. And I believe with this board and the resolve of this new board and their efforts, we'll be able to begin to tackle that, to be able to make sure to be able to reduce our water theft, our unauthorized water use, and also our accounts receivable backlog that is built up, in addition to accounts payable. Now, I want to clarify a point is the reason, in my judgment, is during a 2 or 3 year period, it's going to be impossible for us to be able to move from 64 to 15. It's going to take us some time. It took us time to get here. We didn't get here overnight. It's going to take us some time to get out of this. If the commission does not allow the expenses associated with the cost of operating from between 15 and 39, essentially it's the power and chemicals for that portion, what will happen, it will just take us longer in order to be able to recover our accounts payable situation. So we're trying to right the ship in a 2 to 3 year period, as opposed to taking the experience that we continue, and we're back here another 10 years dealing with the same thing. So that's the reason for the request to consider the alternative rate methodology for moving from 64 to 39, allow that, give us essentially 18 months for us to be able to right the ship, trim this down, demonstrate the resolve of the board, and show significant progress. So that is included, to your question. There are costs in this rate study that would include the power and chemicals associated with water delivery above 15, and the assumption is 39.
Has the water district, since you've been associated with it, considered the option of merger or sale?
With the previous chair, I had Mr. Harvey. I had discussions about would that be a viable option, and yes, that is an option. You got adjacent systems, whether it's Prestonsburg, Kermit, Mountain Water, et cetera, that you have cited previously. And my opinion is that no matter who runs this system, whether it be another public system or a private system, there's going to be a need for a significant infusion of funding to cover the capital and the operating expense. And the current, with the resolve of Bill Harvey previously, my opinion was he was there to be able to make a difference and make improvement. And with this new board, I believe the resolve is there. So my belief, and I've testified before, I would rather see, in my opinion, the people that live in Inez and in Martin County, provide them the tools and the resources and the training and the infrastructure, et cetera, and be able to do it out of the pride for their own customer
What
base.
pride? I mean, it's people that live in Martin County that ruined the system to start with.
Well, I don't have that.
Well, isn't it true? How would you describe the system at present? You spent an hour or a half hour or whatever telling us how bad the system is and all your recommendations to fix it. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And how did it get as bad as it is? Because of past management. Isn't that correct?
I think past management and past practices have led us to the point where we are today.
Well, practices, bad practices are a result of bad management. Isn't that true?
Yes, I would agree with that. I want to qualify, though, is...
I mean, are you familiar? I mean, Prestonsburg has a good water system, doesn't it?
Yes, to my knowledge, they do. They're in compliance and they have an adequate supply.
But there's been no thought of talking to Prestonsburg about selling the system.
I think there's been thought, but to my knowledge, there's been no action on that. And what I would say is that should be part of the discussions going forward in the future, but the immediate need is to address this crisis that we have.
Wouldn't you agree that the citizens of Martin County who receive their water deserve to receive water from the best possible supplier, even if it isn't the Martin County Water District?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, what pride is there in running a water district if you can't supply water?
I would agree, but I would also say there is value in to having residents of the county that are being served to have a voice at the table.
Well, they would have a voice in merger, wouldn't they?
It all depends on how the structure is created. So, as an example, if another system provided that area under another water district and the board configuration was changed and it was a multi-county jurisdiction, so the elected officials of Martin County could appoint board commissioners as well as the elected officials of the acquiring system, yes, that voice is there. Same thing with the city utility. As you're aware, the city utility is not regulated by the commission. So essentially, as long as there is a voice at the table to that governing body that represents the individuals that live in Martin County, I think there can be a very effective way to be able to address issues like this, looking at it from a more regional perspective. So I would not at all discount the opportunity in the future for further mergers or consolidations. We'll have to recognize, in the history, as troubled as it has been, part of this has been because there were previous separate smaller districts that have been combined and consolidated with inside Martin County. So there's no question this has been a long-standing issue. We need proficient, educated, talented leadership at the board level. We need talented individuals at the district to be able to get us out of the situation. My judgment would be is if we are not able to get in that right direction, yes, alternatives should be evaluated for service being provided by others.
I have no further questions. Mr. Cumbo? Anyone else?
Questions?
May
A
this
couple of
witness be-
follow-ups.
I'm sorry, yes,
Your Honor,
ma'am.
if you don't mind. Along with the issue of accounts receivable, one of the other things that's been talked about again and again in the investigation is the problem of theft. And we actually did a data request on that in our last data request, and I believe the answer was that the district's efforts to address the problem of theft consist of going around and looking for cheater bars once a meter has been pulled. So once the district pulls a meter, they'll go back a couple days later and look for cheater bars. That's addressing a problem that was created immediately. Are you aware of any other efforts by the district to address the problem with theft?
No, I'm not. I can elaborate on what should be done, but you may not want to ask me that question.
That's okay, thank you. And then just a couple more questions. Do you know how long Joe Hammond has been in his position?
I don't have the exact dates. I know he told me that he was a retired school teacher and has come back to be able to help the district. I can't give you the specific dates of when he started, up to this date and time. My understanding, it's been past several years.
No further questions.
Anything further? May with this witness be excused? Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Mr. Cumbo, do you have any other witness? And the Concerned Citizens Group, no witnesses?
No witness.
Staff, no witnesses or
We have
witnesses?
no witnesses, but I do need to just make a general motion to accept my exhibits. I'm not sure if I did that.
Yeah, that motion, is there any objection to staff's exhibits? I can't remember the last exhibit. I thought we admitted it, but if we didn't,
We did the
absent
second one.
some
I wasn't sure
objection
about
and
the
a valid
first.
reason, I'm going to admit all the exhibits that have been offered.
Okay.
No objection? Okay, now, Ms. Cromer, are you going to make a statement, or is, okay. Mr. Gardner, you may make a statement.
Thank you, Your Honor, and it's really a two-part, and the Martin County Concerned Citizens position is that this is a crisis of Martin County Water District's own making, and clearly so we believe they're not entitled to any as an emergency. The statute that you referred to earlier, 278-190, subparagraph 2, with subparagraph 3 makes it clear that the burden is on the utility to show that it's just of any increase is just and reasonable. It's on the utility. So they have the burden. We don't believe they've met that burden. Mr. Heitzman described this with respect to depreciation as an advancement on the depreciation. I mean, that's not an emergency. That's valid within a valid issue within the rate case. It's not an emergency here. No analysis was done by the district as to the nature of the emergency. They did an analysis with respect to the rate case, not with respect to the emergency. This is, again, it's of their own making. This commission, on at least one occasion, from the 2010 case that I described, told them what they needed to do, told them to do it, or gave them the option of doing it, and they didn't do it. They didn't do a surcharge. They didn't try to collect additional money because of the water loss back then. And, frankly, the witnesses for the board members and Mr. Heitzman have been, very forthright and honest about what's going on. They've been dumped a really bad problem, and they're doing their best. to try to solve it. Mr. Kerr was, just as honest as he could be when he said he wouldn't, as a lender, as a bank, he wouldn't lend money to this district at this time, and yet, in effect, that's what they're doing on an emergency basis, is lend us the money, trust us, we'll be right going forward. Yet we know they're not collecting accounts receivable. We know that there's an issue with water theft that they haven't done. They clearly haven't gotten their house in order. So that's our position, is that they're not entitled to. If the commission decides they are entitled to some sort of emergency relief, and then this is what I would like to suggest with all due respect. First, the statute that you provided ended up saying also that you can permit all or a portion of the rates to become effective under terms and conditions as the commission may order. That's the last clause of the actual paragraph that you read, Your Honor. So that means you can put any conditions you want to, and you don't have to give them the full amount of money. So here's some suggestions, and I've got a couple suggestions with respect to the surcharge, with respect to the money itself, and then a couple suggestions that I think should occur with respect to the utility more generally. So first, any money, and so, Your Honor, you make reference to your prior life as working with school boards and understanding those sorts of issues. Well, in my prior life, I spent a lot of time doing commercial bankruptcies. And as I indicated with the question, people distressed debtors are in Chapter 11 all the time. Banks lend them money. They put conditions on the really strict conditions on the loaning of the money. And that's in effect what this is. So I think actually a great start as to what conditions should apply would be beginning on page 4 of the staff report in 2010 300 case. And let me tell you, there were several orders, and I'll tell you the date of that particular order that incorporated the staff report. Maybe it's going to be harder for me to find, but it's, just 1 second, I'm sorry. That order was the order entered May the 11th, 2011, which incorporated the staff report's recommendations. Such things as, and this was on page 4 of the staff report, the filing of a comprehensive non-revenue reduction plan. They ought to have a plan as to how the money is going to be spent. If they're going to ask the citizens, they're going to be granted money now because of the emergency, we've got to know exactly how they're going to spend it. Number 2, we've got to approve it. They've got to deposit any money they get as a result. Treat it like a surcharge. We can do that. The statute that I read gives you the authority. Make this additional money a surcharge and decide how they're going to spend it. Filing, it ought to have 2 signatures on every account, on every check. For example, I would suggest Mr. Horn be one of those signatories.
That's not the case now? They don't have 2 signatures? It is the case.
Okay. Is Mr. Horn signing checks now, or is it 2 staff people are signing every check?
That I don't know. Who's signing the checks, though?
I don't sign checks.
Mr. Crow, do you sign checks? Do you sign checks as treasurer? Well, I think I said Mr. Horn. I think actually Mr. Kerr, as the treasurer, should co-sign every check coming out of this escrow account, this surcharge account, and it ought to be separate. And it ought to be against a budget, how you're going to spend it. Ought to file a report with the commission monthly, so you know how that money is being spent. I also think that they need to do the plan to you all. It seems like it's their job to say in general how the money is going to be spent. My suggestion would be they give you a plan, and that if there is a surcharge, it doesn't go into effect until you approve the plan. If they get it to you Wednesday, the commission would approve it or, review it and approve it on Thursday or whatever. But the plan as to how they're going to spend this surcharge money, they need to get you a specific plan as to how it's going to be done. And they don't get the money until you get a plan that you approve. The citizens deserve that. And so that's my suggestion. As far as what the amount is, again, I don't believe depreciation should count. You all could look at it and see, making your own judgment as to how much it should be, if that's what you say. There are a couple other issues. One of the things is these open accounts that zip. This is not related to the specific surcharge. This is just a general concern, is that those $3, $4, $5, $200 checks at Zip Zone amount to $175,000. I just don't, and any employee can go in there and do it, and they incur this obligation. It's just, that needs to be looked at before another dime goes into Zip Zone. You just can't tell what those are. So with that, Your Honor, again, the citizens of Martin County, concerned citizens, appreciate the time that you all are taking with this case and the seriousness with which you take it, as well as the board members and Mr. Heitzman. I mean, we all want the same thing.
Let me ask a question, Mr. Gardner. What if no emergency relief is granted and the district is unable in 2 months, 3 months, 5 months to make payroll or to buy materials, chemicals that are needed to treat the water? Basically, how would that serve the interests of the ratepayers?
It wouldn't. And I'm basing this on the fact that this is an emergency for a few months, because the ARF, my understanding is, typically try to get it done in 120 days. So the full evaluation, for example, the depreciation amount could be handled in that rate case. But I understand.
I mean, you understand, though.
Absolutely.
I guess when you were at the commission, you had a lot more employees than we do.
Yes, sir.
We're down to a skeleton crew here. So we'll do the best that we can. But I wanted, you suggested, I think, that the district consider a bankruptcy. Is that correct?
No, sir, I wasn't necessarily considering that. I was just saying that in my experience with troubled the district may want to do that, to try to deal with, bankruptcy won't cure, bankruptcy will help them with the accounts that are past due. Bankruptcy won't create funds, bankruptcy won't, do the things that they need to do to get clean water. Bankruptcy would give them an opportunity to deal collectively with the creditors, and that's what bankruptcy would do.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Cumbo, anything to say?
Well, Commissioners, I would suggest this. We didn't get into this overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. We have got a new board, and quite honestly, I'm much encouraged by this new board, because they have demonstrated a resolve to address these problems that has not been present in my experience in previous times. And I believe the district has met its burden of going forward. You've heard testimony that we believe is I would suggest is credible and believable and honest, and nobody's pulled any punches. It is what it is. We're here where we're at today, and without some kind of relief, the district is going to cease to function. Now, is that because of past management practices? It could very well be. But we've got a new board. We've got folks who are dedicated to riding this ship. We've got educated, qualified business folks who are doing what it takes. I've been at this a long time, and I believe this is the best board that I've seen in many, many years to right this ship. The commission made note that the accountant, Linda Sumter, has not been paid for some time, and quite honestly, their lawyer has not been paid for some time.
I want to intervene. There's one thing that I found in my 45 years of law practice before I took here. The most successful businesses are the ones that pay their lawyers and their accountants.
And with that thought, Judge, I wouldn't be here today if I didn't believe this ship is going to be righted.
You need this rate increase.
I sure do. In all seriousness, I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe this could be fixed. And that's why I'm continuing to provide my services and will continue to provide my services. And I think Ms. Sumter will continue to provide her services because we believe this can be fixed. I believe that we have an obligation to our community to fix it. And I believe this board feels that obligation and will make it happen. And if we get some emergency relief, that will give us some breathing room to put into practice some of these best management practices that Mr. Heisman has recommended. And we appreciate his work. And he, quite honestly, I think he's far exceeded the value of his contract. And I hope he will continue to help us in the future. But in summation, we believe we put on our case, and we believe we've justified the need for an emergency increase.
I will agree with you that both Mr. Horn and Mr. Kerr are impressive, and I think that you do have a good board. And we're willing, I think, I'm not in the other case, to basically give you a reasonable opportunity to try to fix it. But over the years, there's always this, we're going to when, or we're going to if. The day of the when and the if are over, really. So fix it. Do the best you can. In a lot of ways, the new board is like a trauma surgeon. And someone's been shot up and then run over by a truck, and they bring it in, and he's on life support, and then you've got to somehow save this victim. So good luck. Is there anything else that anyone would like to say? Okay, if not, we'll try to have a decision as quickly as possible, and at this time, this hearing is adjourned.